and the amount of material we have to work through this morning, I'd like to convene the joint meeting of City Council, Finance Advisory Committee, call the meeting to order, and ask for a roll call of both City Council and Finance Advisory. City Clerk?
Okay, Jacobson. Fanukin.
Can't hear.
Fanukin. Markwart.
Here.
Snow.
Here.
Noriko.
Here.
Baker.
Here.
O'Leary.
Here.
Ray.
Here?
Peddle.
Here.
Golden.
Here.
Terazinski.
Here.
Conlon. Verbic.
Here.
McNeely.
Neely, hi. I'm here.
Gerhart. Eleven present.
Okay. We do have quorums on both sides, and I'll turn to City Manager Gore to lead us into the agenda items we have in front of us, water infrastructure plan and water rate study.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mayor. And I'll just give a brief overview before I turn it over to Director Haley. The goal this morning is to go through the capital funds and have an overview and provide you with detailed information. The first item, as far as the water fund, we're going to have a presentation by the consultants that have been hired to do the water infrastructure plan and the water rate study. And with that, I'm going to turn over to our Finance Director, Kathy Haley, to see if she has any more specifics before we begin the first presentation.
No, we do have three representatives here from Burns and McDonnell. They've been working for the last several months with Brian Favor from our water division. So with that, I'll let him get started. Or-
Is Brian? Yeah, Brian, say a few words.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Last year, if you recall, during budgetary discussions, council amended the water fund budget to include an update to our water system master plan, and in conjunction with that, a water rate study. The water system master plan, what that does is it looks at the overall water system, our capital needs, our future demands, and in conjunction with the water rates, or the water system master plan, then the water rate study then looks at what are our current rate structure. Are they adequate to meet those demands? Are they adequate to meet those capital needs? And if not, what possible adjustments can be made? Staff performed a RFP. We had 5 respondents to the RFP to conduct these 2 studies. Ultimately, Burns and McDonnell was chosen and approved by council last year to perform those studies. Over the past several months, as Kathy had mentioned, they have been analyzing our water system, analyzing our current rate structure, and they recently have completed their analysis, and we have 3 representatives here with Burns McDonnell who are going to give a PowerPoint presentation on their findings. And so with that, I will turn it over to Randall Patchett, sorry, drew a blank there, and he'll guide us through the 2 studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you again for, my name is Randy Patchett with Burns and McDonnell. Thank you for having us this morning to talk to you a little bit about your water system. As Brian mentioned, what we were contracted to do was to do an overall review of your water system in terms of master plan, and then based on our findings, to come back and work with city staff and things to develop a rate study and some thoughts in terms of rates going forward in the city of DeKalb. So to just kind of get started, I did pass out, you've got a gray, little handout that's got a gray cover on it. The gray, that particular handout basically has the same slides that we're putting up on the screen today. What we had done is, initially when we do water system master planning, we look at several components. The components are, we look at your water supply. Is your water supply adequate to meet your current demands and future demands? We look at your water treatment. We look at your water storage, and we look at your distribution system. So there's 4 components that we look at, and we look at the adequacy of those components to meet current demands, and then also what we would look at and project as future demands, typically out to the next 20 years. And that's what we really looked at here, was going out 20 years on the demand side. How much water that we project the city of DeKalb to need over the next 20 years. We also looked at your raw and treated water quality data, and in the analysis of your system, we looked at your water distribution system and analyzed the system based on hydraulic capacity and water main break history. So some of our findings and recommendations based on water consumption. In 2013, you billed about 3.06 million gallons of water usage in the city per day. So what that means overall is that you have 3.06 million gallons of water that your customers are currently using. Every system has some leakage. We did not identify any evidence of leakage that would say that the city of DeKalb is any significantly better or any worse than any other community that we've worked in and seen. So in general, we think your system is running reasonably well. 83.2%, so about 83% or 4/5 of your community water usage is residential, with about 17% being non-residential. So your primary demands are residents in the community. You do have the university and some industry and some commercial also.
Randy, excuse me, could you just advance the slide?
Oh, I'm sorry, so busy.
Thank you.
On my bed.
Excuse me. So is the university strictly counted under non-residential?
University, I believe we've counted under non-residential in this case, so. So it's in that 80, I'm sorry, it's in the residential, I'm sorry. It's in the residential, so it's part of that 84%.
Okay, all right, thank you.
83, 84%. What this, based on your population, that equates to about 64 gallons per day usage of water, which again is very consistent and right in the norm of what we see in the majority of the northern Illinois communities. Overall, in terms of an annual basis, you had about 1.12 billion gallons of water that you sold and put out last year. And as we said, 8.17% of the water is unaccounted for, which is, again, in terms of industry standards, that's pretty reasonable. You can always work to try and tighten that up a little bit, but that's not a bad number.
Has that number stayed stable or has it gone up?
You know, I believe it stayed fairly stable, hasn't it, Brian, based on our look?
Yeah, that
Thank
was a
you.
slight increase over the previous year due to a main break we had out of A.O. Smith that we don't have to.
Thank you.
But generally, you seem to be running in that 6 to 7, 8% range, and again, that's pretty reasonable. Your water main breakage, I think, like we said, that number might be slightly high on the slide, but that's due, as Brian said, to some recent water main break history and some loss of water through water main breaks. So in terms of the findings and recommendations in the study that we did, you know, your water supply, you currently have 6 deep wells. You've got 3 shallow water supply wells. The firm capacity of the wells in your system is 7.6 million gallons per day, with the largest well out of service. So when we talk about capacity and firm capacity, what we mean is firm capacity, we typically take the largest well that you've got out of service, because we assume that you may have one down, and that's what we call firm capacity. So that gives you a little bit of contingency and redundancy in your system. Your projected maximum day demand is about 6.5 million gallons per day, so you have enough capacity in your system, and that is the projected demand, so that's the future demand. So from a supply side, you've got capacity, and that includes having capacity with your largest well out of service. So we believe that you've got adequate supply in the city to meet your current and future demands going forward. So our recommendations here really are just rehabilitation of the city wells that is consistent really with what the city had already been planning to do. So there's not anything that's really significant changes, I think, to what the city had been looking at in its capital improvements plans on water supply. Water treatment. Your water water is currently in good quality. You've got low turbidity, low TOC. You've got high hardness, which is not a surprise with groundwater well water. And really overall the quality of the water is pretty good. So I think the issue in the treatment, after you've treated the water, your water meets all standards and is good quality water. Again, what we talked to with Brian and his staff was really where you're at is you need to have some replacement of the media, the ion exchange media that takes out some of the constituents that you want out of your water. But again, pretty good shape on your water treatment. Nothing significant that we saw that needed to be planned for the next 20 years. Water storage. You've got 4 elevated water tanks, storage tanks, with a combined storage volume of 5.75 million gallons per day. Projected maximum total required storage volume is 4.8. So again, when we say projected maximum, we're talking about your future demand. So you're in, again, on the storage side, you're in very good shape. So what you have storage-wise is sufficient to serve your existing and projected populations. We recommend repainting 3 of the water towers. One of the water towers was repainted in 2014, and again, this remained consistent with what I think the city was already planning to do. So,
Randy, magnitude of expense to repaint the water towers?
Depends a little bit on the size of the tank, but I think I think we're in the in probably the $3 to $4 million range.
For all 3?
For all 3.
Thank you.
Brian, am I way off with that, or? I don't have the numbers. Numbers are actually in the report, but usually
Yeah.
it's in the $1 million plus range
Okay.
per tank to paint.
$700,000.
So
Thank
it's,
you.
so that's what I think we've got budgeted for that. Water distribution, you've got 177 miles of water main in your system, really ranging, I would say, more from, 3 is in the slide, but the reality is it's more, I think it's more 4. You've got some 4 and 6 inch diameter water main here, 8, 10, and 12 beyond. So not very much the 3 inch diameter water main. You've got 2,400 fire hydrants, almost 3,000 valves, and right around 11,000 service lines. So 11,000 connections off your distribution system. Again, the projected demand, your average day is about 4.32. This is what your 2034 projected demand is. 4.32 million gallons per day, max of 6.48. We've talked about those a little bit earlier. Your peak hourly is almost 13 million gallons per day. When we looked at your system, we looked at several conditions, hydraulic deficiencies, and water main break histories. One of the things that we looked at that's really important in every community is to maintain a minimum pressure in your system. And what we looked at and evaluated for that minimum pressure was 35 pounds per square inch, 35 PSI. A lot of times when you're in a community, if you fall below 35 PSI, you'll start to have residents or constituents give you a phone call potentially about low water pressure. You are one of the very few communities that we've looked at and evaluated where that wasn't a concern. We had a model, we looked at the model. We even added some fire flows in some areas and tried to see what would happen overall, but in general, from the area where the fire affects is just the very immediate area where it's at, but your system performs very well. So I would say really kudos to, or congrats to your team to be able to maintain and have your system set up to maintain that kind of pressure. It really was somewhat of a surprise to us. We normally don't see that. So we looked at that, and then we also looked at two conditions, which were hydraulic deficiencies and water main break history. And hydraulic deficiencies, really what those are is, we talked about being able to maintain a pressure, but are we actually having to pump too high pressures into the system at locations, and then fire flows, being able to meet fire flow demands. So we did identify some areas where we made some recommendations to increase the size of some of the mains in the system to improve fire flow conditions and reduce pressures in the system, which we believe will help over the long term reduce the number of water main breaks that you have in the system. So we looked at main break history. It correlated fairly well with what we would have expected based on the model. And again, I would say even on your main break history, while you do have main breaks and you've got an older system, the number of main breaks that you experience is actually, in my opinion, below the norm with respect to what we've seen. So from a standpoint of findings and recommendations, you know, we found that you had several locations that experienced fire flows of less than 2,000 gallons per minute, and at a residual pressure of 20 psi. So in those locations, again, we'd want to increase size. You've got a lot of 4-inch and 6-inch main in the system that result in significant pressure losses. Water main breaks analyzed were above normal in some areas. So what we looked at for criteria there was if you had a segment of main between two valves, so you've got two water main valves out in your system, in that segment, if you had 3 breaks in that segment over the last 10 years, we feel that you should be considering replacement of that main going forward. So when we put together our recommendations for the city, we looked at areas where we felt fire flow conditions needed to be improved, and also areas where we had what we considered to be main break history that was a little excessive. So we developed basically a plan for the community where we actually, I think we set up, we've got the reports there, the water master plans, and if you look at the back, you kind of see how thick they are. Well, there's basically 30 different pages back there that show what water mains that we would recommend to be replaced basically every year over a 30-year period. The cost of that work was in, I think it was around $28 million. And that was incorporated. We did that work, and then that work got incorporated along with the other capital improvements into the rate study work that Ted will talk about here shortly. So what we've suggested for the city is that you plan on spending basically about $1 million a year in upgrading your water distribution system. Now, I will tell you that that upgrade and what those are basically less than industry, what some recommendations in industry norm are. But we took that into consideration when we looked at your system and where you really have in our opinion, challenges that you should address. So overall, I would say your system's in pretty good shape. So our final summary and recommendations were that, actually this, I should probably highlight this area here. We show the different locations of where we would recommend water main replacements. We develop the plans for each year. Sorry.
Randy, question on this map. In the electronic version, the study area is defined with a dotted line. The west side of Annie Glidden, where the university resides, is not included in the study area. Is that accurate? West of Annie Glidden?
I believe that is, I believe that when we looked at the study area there, I will double check that, but I don't think
Okay.
we had an issue with the water main so much over there.
It was this area.
This little piece right here.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that wasn't in the study area, who's supplying the water in that? I mean, aren't we providing water supply to that area as well?
Brian, I'd have to defer.
What area is
Is this area kind of,
Yeah, the
Right.
west of Annie Glidden,
Yeah.
NIU.
the camp, kind of the campus area?
Oh, the campus area. Yeah, most of that main, I shouldn't say most of the main, a lot of that main is private water main. It's actually owned by NIU.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's,
This
Brian,
area.
explain it.
Yeah, some of that is owned by NIU, although you're right. There's gaps where it doesn't show the main. Yeah, I did not notice that. I apologize for that. Yeah, you're right.
But part of that is
Part of that is
private.
part of that is private, but a section that would be our main too, so.
And we can, on our end, we can relook at that area.
On page 10, there do show locations in that area, if it's the
Right.
one that I'm thinking of, that are below 2,000 gallons per minute fire flow. So it was at least considered.
It was considered, I don't know why that, I guess maybe just the,
It could be just we don't quite have the figure.
it may just not be showing the mains, but like you said, that the
Right.
analysis is actually done, and it's just not showing the.
Yeah, that could be what it is. So we'll double check that and make sure that we update that as.
Brian, is this mapping off of your system?
Mapping's off of our system, yes.
So this is all existing stuff you had in your computer database?
Correct.
So you, in this area that we're under discussion, NIU is outside of that? You said it's private?
Well, portions of it are, but I can see, looking at the map here, that there are portions that should have been included in here. But yeah, a lot of the main at NIU is what we consider private water main. It's not owned by the city, it's not maintained by the city.
But Brian, even if that's private water supply, don't we have a concern with supply to those residents?
Absolutely.
Well, and the
Okay.
supply side, the demand, the water usage, that's all in here. So
Okay.
all of the study included all of the water demand and usage in those areas. What I think we may have done here is we may have looked at the area, put it in the model, and we may have to adjust our exhibit
Okay.
based on the study limits, is really what I think happened. So we'll look at that and we'll do that and go from there. But we do know there is some private main there and there is some public main.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, at least from my perspective, there's an important issue. Because the chart that we're looking at right now refers to replacement of the actual infrastructure itself for delivering the water services. But the area of the university that is identified there west of Annie Glidden Road with fire flows of less than 2,000, what is it, gallons per minute?
Million.
Yeah, okay. Okay. That includes a lot of the larger residence halls. So we have an interest from the city's perspective of ensuring the fire flow there, whether we own the mains or not. So, you know, it's important, maybe the main replacement plan that is on the current chart helps take care of that fire flow. I don't know. But that fire flow does concern me, as is the case with some other areas of the city where that low fire flow is in places where if we had a major event, that could be a major concern.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind when you see, if you just look at that map in its entirety, it maybe looks alarming, but if you put the other layer over top, which shows a fire hydrant that may be 50 feet away, that does meet the fire flows. In other words, we have locations in, along Third Street, Second Street, the downtown area here, where we have a lot of these red dots, where we have a 4-inch water main on one side of the road and an 8-inch on the other side. So those hydrants that are on that 4-inch are gonna show up as being under the 2,000 gallons per minute. Across the street, though, there's an 8-inch, which would be above. I'm not saying all of them, but when we really start to dive into this and look at this, because this looks alarming, but when you really start to dive into it, it's pockets of locations. And up at NIU, I'd have to go through and look at each one of those, but it may be just a dead-end hydrant that they
Right,
ran.
and in the modeling, if you look at what we did there, we did include, you're right, there are some red dots on that side, on the west side of Annie Glidden Road. But I think if we look at the exhibit, we can kind of see that they were fairly, they were not nearly as concentrated as they were in some other areas. So what we will do is we will go back and revisit those and see if in fact they are something like what Brian's talking about, which is the dead ends and areas where we actually, in the main itself, we might have adequate flow, but right at the dead end area, we might be a little
Yeah,
short.
we'll have to analyze each
So
one
we'll
of
analyze
these.
that
There may
further.
be occasions where we can eliminate the 4-inch main, just cut it off and abandon it, and then we'll transfer the services from that over to the 8-inch that's on the other side of the street. And so each one of these really needs to be analyzed almost on a separate,
Alderman Fanouken.
Brian and Eric, along those lines, though, in the situations you talk about where you have hydrants on one side with greater flow, are those identified for the fire department? Are you aware which is which?
We are, and the average fire engine will only pump 1,500 gallons a minute. So what we would do is we'll just, we're not going to connect multiple engines to multiple, to the same hydrant. So we'll just connect to the other side of the street, and it works out fine for us.
Okay, but the fire department is aware of which are
Yes.
the lower flow
We
hydrants?
have maps.
Okay, thank you.
and the 2,000 gallons per minute is really a standard that we've set upon ourselves. It's not really an industry standard, it's more or less, that's what we would like to see from our fire hydrants.
That's correct. So it's and you folks are conservative with your, you're not, I don't want to say you're overly conservative, but you're safe, maybe is a better way to word it.
Director
You're safe with your
DeVita.
2,000.
I have a question along the same lines. When I look south of 88 in the area that's designated to be industrial park, I see in 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, you've talked about potential demand in the future. Have you calculated in what the demand would be with new industrial development?
Yes, we have. We projected new residential development, we projected industrial development, we projected commercial development. Now, what we all have to be aware of is that, let's say you have somebody come in here that is a really heavy water user. So they come in and they want to use 1 million gallons of water a day. That would have to be an assessment where we'd have to look at it, the city would have to look at it and make sure that they can accommodate that. That is not uncommon. You don't plan for a 1 million or 2 million gallon a day water user to come in. When someone like that comes in, you typically work with that entity, determine if you can provide the water supply, and if they want to come in and you don't have the infrastructure, for example, you need a new well to do that, you would actually work with that entity, and that entity, usually as part of the development, would share in the cost or share in some way, shape, or form of bringing that well in. So we did use standard industry projections that come from CMAP. We also looked at the projections that the city itself has done in terms of population growth and growth in demand in the community, and that was factored into the study. So that was, like I said, I think that figure, we probably should not have drawn that figure the way that we did, because we did look at Northern Illinois, we did look at in the modeling and everything else on that side, and that was all included.
Chair Pella.
Yeah,
Pedal.
one question I have is how do you account for water flow, and I'm specifically talking about fire, for buildings that the water source is inside, so a taller building? Is that, I mean, you're not really fighting it directly off a hydrant. How does that get accounted for in the water system?
Accounted for in terms of measured?
Yeah, in terms of measuring, how would you measure the fire flow within, say, Zuloff Hall, where you have the internal things in the stairway for, I don't even know what they're
Yeah,
called.
well, I think.
I'll answer that, Mark. What you have is, it's the same amount of gallons for fighting the fire on floor 1 as is on floor 10, for example.
Right.
But inside the building, there'd be a fire pump, and that fire pump would raise the pressure to get that water up to that.
And where is that water coming from? Is it coming from a hydrant?
It's gonna
or-
come from the main on the outside, and it flows through the fire pump up to the floor level of the fire.
Okay, so that would be accounted for by evaluating the main from which those,
Everything is done off the main on the exterior of the building.
okay, all right,
Right.
thank you.
Any other, we can go to the
Good to go.
final slide here, if any other questions. So just to kind of recap what the finding and recommendations were on the water distribution system. What we came up with was replacement of approximately 55,000 linear feet of water main, and we felt that it would be best suited to be kind of looking at that over about a 30-year period. 10.5 miles of water main would be replaced. The long-term plan for the city, which would be beyond the 30-year period, would be to kind of focus on these water mains that you have that are less than 8 inches in diameter, and where you, as time permits, you go in and you increase those to an 8-inch diameter water main, which in today's, if you were looking at things today, that would be the standard size water main that you would put in. Back when the city was developed and built, just like many other communities, there's 4- and 6-inch diameter water main in those cities. So I think part of the other recommendation would be to look longer term, even beyond the 30-year period and 20-year periods we talked about, and think about where you'd want to go. And I think any schedule that you would develop or put together, you need to have it be realistic, something that you can achieve, and you need to take into account and manage other things that happen in your budgets, and things such as water main breaks and just general water main operation and maintenance funds. So you have to handle kind of these upgrades and these replacements in a manner that the community can tolerate, while maintaining the adequate water supply, demand, and fire protection for your community.
Randy, we touched on the potential industrial growth. I'd like to focus on the residential population assumptions that are in the
Okay.
study, page 3-1, 3-2. And it appears these are a combination of previous census data as well as City of DeKalb Planning Division
That's
numbers.
correct, yes.
It appears that through 2024, the population's projected to remain at 44,000.
That
And-
is,
And then we're growing at 1.1%
that's correct,
each year through 2034.
that's correct.
Okay. So 2034, we're looking at somewhere toward 56,000, 60,000 population.
Yes, yeah.
Over a 20-year period.
And
Okay.
water demand, from the demand basis.
From demand, okay.
So that is, are there any other questions on the study at this point, the master planning study? So in summary, you're in really good, I think you're in really good shape with your water supply, your water storage, your water treatment, and your ability to deliver water to your customers. There are some things within the water distribution system that we feel should be improved over a period of time, but you do not have a situation where you have any emergency kind of need or situation in your water distribution system. So the good news there is that you can plan and move forward, and you've got a good system.
Brian, what size water main is being installed on South First Street?
That is going from a 4-inch water main to an 8-inch.
8-inch, thank you.
And that'll tie in actually with the 10-inch water main on Second Street. It'll run down Franklin to Second Street and tie in with even a larger main there, so it should have very, very good fire flow on First Street. And we did not include that actually in here with the assumption that we won't be doing that, so
Sure.
that's not on the map here. It shows the
My
fire
point
flow.
was, I just wanted to make sure that our short-term work is consistent with what is being projected in this study and recommended. Good.
And I think all of your standards in terms of any development or anything coming in with new mains, if it's a public main, 8 inches is small as you'll go, right? So
Good.
you've pretty much got yourself in a position where you're already implementing that for any new mains that are being constructed.
Randy, just from an overall perspective, you guys do a lot of this work
Yes.
in a lot of communities. From an overall ranking, A, B, C, D, where do you think this overall system?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't run into very many systems that I look at that don't have either a treatment issue or a storage issue, meaning, hey, we think you ought to add another 1 or 2 elevated tanks or storage reservoirs. So I would say that you guys are in the, you gotta understand my ranking criteria here too. I don't usually give A's, but I would give you guys kind of a B+ thing here. So I think you're really in pretty good, you really are in pretty good shape, and we would tell you candidly if we didn't think that you were, okay?
Randy, I have a question. What would be one thing we could do to improve our ISO rating? If we were gonna do 1 or 2 things, what could we do to improve that?
I think your ISO rating would be part of what we're trying to talk about in here, which is because what your ISO is, maybe we want to explain that a little bit. Does everybody know what an ISO rating is? It's basically, I'll let you explain it, but it's
Well, it's a
insurance.
rating by an insurance services organization, and we've talked about this a lot in the commercial building. And one of the things we're efficient about is some of these smaller mains in the ISO rating. I just didn't know if there was something we could do.
There's not a whole lot that you can do without going in and making improvements to your system, increasing the sizes of these mains. So what the insurance rating does, it comes out, you'll do what are called fire flow tests on your hydrants and provide other information. That's usually a combination of information provided by Public Works and your fire department, and you get a rating from the insurance agency based on where you stand in terms of their opinion on kind of a relative basis in terms of meeting adequate fire flow requirements. The biggest challenge that I think the city of DeKalb has in that area is implementing and moving forward with a plan to upgrade the sizes of your 4-inch and 6-inch diameter water mains. If you do that, you're going to improve, hands down, no ifs, ands, or buts, you'll improve your ISO ratings.
In our last test, we fared very well in the new sections, but not well in the old.
And that is what the model would show, that's what the study shows, and if you look at where the majority of the main replacements are recommended, they're in your older system. So I would say the results of the work that you did for your ISO rating and your study are very consistent with what we saw in the modeling and what we saw in break history and just overall. So, as Brian says, I don't want to give the impression here that there's any anything that's an emergency or a catastrophe, because you can hook up to more than one hydrant in some of these areas and do some things, and your tanker, your equipment is 1,500 GPM. I work with communities where 1,500 GPM is what they're looking for, not 2,000. So, just to kind of come back and recap on this, system is in pretty good shape overall, in our opinion. Our recommendations would be to move toward fixing those areas where you've had break history, and those areas where you've got your smaller diameter mains, and some of the things that you're talking about will just naturally improve. So that's really what the biggest challenge is there.
Chair Peddle?
I want to try to make a point to any citizens that might be watching now or later, that the ISO rating for fire does affect your insurance rates.
Yes.
I did a study a number of years ago, and my guess is, you know, if you, what are we now, Eric?
We're 4.
We're a 4, okay. And it goes up.
The higher you are, the worse you are.
Okay, all right. So if we improved our ISO rating, even though that might be of some cost to citizens, they would get a portion, if not all of that, back through their fire insurance rates. I actually had the insurance industry take and compare ISO rating with an identical house, how much you would save. And it was not insubstantial. I mean, we're not talking about thousands of dollars, but we're talking about a meaningful offset. And
That's true.
the other thing is, and maybe this was clear from the statement that's made, but I mean, the ISO rating, even though we think of it as a rating of the fire department, it's really a rating of the water supply. It's really driven by water supply, water distribution, and water pressure.
That's correct. And so I would agree with everything the Sheriff said.
Randy, with the study of demand and infrastructure, I guess the question in my mind leads to I think the next point we're gonna discuss is the rate study.
Right.
Can we afford the implementation of maintaining the system going forward?
We believe you can. You will see in the rate study presentation, which Ted will come up and initiate, what the impact is to the rates to the city. What we tried to do in the development of that rate study was to take into consideration, since you don't have emergency issues here necessarily, we tried to take into consideration how to implement this program and have it be within industry standard, reasonable, and I think that that next piece of this presentation will hopefully present that.
Okay.
Okay?
Are there any further questions at this point on the demand or the infrastructure side? Kate, did you have?
No.
Okay. Let's move forward then.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. At this point, I'd like to introduce Ted Kelly. Ted is actually one of our national, I would call him a national expert on rate studies for municipal utility systems, not just water, but power, wastewater, water, different things. And he's here today to talk about the rate aspects of this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. We want to take the next little portion of time here and go through the overall rate study that we've completed at this point and explain the process and kind of the results. Certainly the process that we followed it's a basic 3-step process. It's a proven approach that's been utilized for over many years. We followed the guidelines that are promulgated by the American Water Works Association in a manual that they produce, referred to as the M1 manual, that kind of lays out the overall guidelines. But the process really gets down to 3 key steps. The financial planning step, which is looking at overall revenue adequacy for the system. The cost of service step, which is looking at the revenue responsibility on the basis of different customer classes that you serve. And then the final step is the rate design process, which is looking at revenue recovery. So making sure that the revenues that you're recovering through the rates that you charge for service are adequate to meet the overall revenue requirement, both from the operations side, and in this case, we're wanting to make sure we fund the capital project. We had some underlying guidelines that we were following here, keeping in mind that some of the objectives that we had to meet as we went through this process, we're looking at minimizing the need for any sudden adjustments to rates. So we're trying to minimize the impact to customers' bills. We want to maintain revenues at a level sufficient to meet the requirements. We want to maintain the capital fund at some minimum level that was established, mitigate the need for the issuance of new debt. You have debt existing to pay for things. We're trying to make sure we don't issue any more debt than we need to. And then make sure that we do fund that overall capital program, the major capital, and then your renewal and replacement program that Randy's gone through from the master plan. One of the things we wanted to look at first was from the standpoint of where you sit today compared to other Illinois communities. You're kind of in that sweet spot from the standpoint you aren't the lowest rates, but you're certainly not the highest rates. So you're very well positioned now. So we want to keep that in mind as we're looking at what we propose to move forward with, is where you're going to sit. If you're the lowest rates, sometimes that's not an indication that's a great thing, because then sometimes you're really not addressing things as far as looking to the future and addressing your capital needs.
Does this assume that all the other communities have an average usage rate that's comparable?
What we did was we calculated typical bills under their existing rates, utilizing the same level of usage for those, so applying that same level of usage to all the rates that are out there.
Alderman Fanouken.
Yeah, with this list of comparables that you have, how many of these have their own wells, and how many of these get water from the city of Chicago? Because I think that's a cost difference.
Oh, specifically, Randy, you can address some of those. Some of those do get from Chicago.
St. Charles, Crystal Lake, Rockford, Sycamore, I want to say,
But I'm guessing some of them like,
Parkersville, Urbana, a number of these do
yeah,
not
like
get
Romeoville, though I would guess Hoffman Estates, Rolling Meadows, and Hanover Park are likely to have city of Chicago water. And
Just a
without
portion.
having to have their own wells, I mean, that's a different cost factor for them
Absolutely.
compared to us.
Yeah, and that's why,
That's correct, and I do a lot of work for those communities.
Mhm.
They do not have their own wells, but what they do have is different than you have, is they have had to build 60-inch, 90-inch diameter water mains, maintain those water mains, have a booster, a pump station, for example, for the one that Hoffman Estates is on, they have a 100 million gallon a day pump station that they have to operate and maintain, and they have 30 delivery structures out in their system to put water to different communities. Hoffman Estates itself has, I think, 3 of those delivery structures. So there are some costs that they have that you don't have in terms of their well and your operations staff. I can tell you that they have an operations staff for Hoffman, probably about, you include the other agency, probably about 8 or 9 people. I don't know how that compares on the water operations staff here. I think it's actually probably the same size or more
Yeah.
than what you have.
Well, again, though, my point is that, like, we'll find some of that stuff in the report, but somebody listening in may not know that, and that's a
Absolutely.
good point to make public, so thank you.
absolutely. And when we do comparisons, I will tell you there are no two systems exactly alike. What we try to look at is systems that are similar, and certainly you look at systems around you, because, as a consumer, I always want to say, how are my rates compared to my neighbors that live next door in the
Right.
next community?
Yep, thank
So
you.
that's typical to look at those things.
Chair Peddle.
I think it's very important when we're talking about water, this doesn't necessarily surprise me. I would be willing to wager that the average citizen, and myself included, would not know what they pay for water per month. And the reason for that is because you've got the sanitary district and you've got garbage. And for me, garbage is the largest portion of my water bill. I know what I pay every 3 months, but if you asked me today, I could not tell you how much I pay per month for water. And any changes that are made, people are gonna look at their total bill, not necessarily see that smallest piece, I think, which is for water.
Roughly, for typical. Yeah. And I would tell you, you know, a lot of communities, and including here, one of the things we face in the industry today is we go around the country talking about the results of studies. Dave and I would both tell you that in most communities, we are undervaluing our water service because it's a valuable commodity. Certainly in some areas of the country where water supply is a lot tighter, the price that we're paying is changing. And I think that's something that we have to face, and we'll talk about it a little bit as we go through. Typically, over the last, as Dave and I were talking this morning driving here, over the last 20 to 25 years on an annual basis, if you're looking at the increase in costs for water systems, on average, you're probably talking an increase of about 5% a year. And I don't know a lot of communities that are approving adjustments to rates at the level of 5% a year. So we haven't been keeping up with our increased costs in this period. So we're facing a lot of situations. Here, your system's in pretty good shape. We deal with some communities that have not addressed their major capital requirements, and sometimes they're shorting themselves on operation and maintenance. So now they're having to do catch-up. So you're not doing catch-up. You're making sure you stay ahead of things and addressing things to have the system in good operating shape going forward. Some of our key assumptions, Randy talked about the forecast as far as from a capital perspective. But from a revenue perspective, we look at things a little bit more conservatively. You have to, because it takes so long to plan a system, you got to plan for more growth than from the revenue side. Now, on the revenue side, we took the assumption on a conservative approach that there's no forecasting growth in customer accounts or usage for our forecast period. We're looking at a consumer price index increase of approximately 1.5% a year. We use general utility inflation of 3% a year. For the proposed new debt that we did factor into our forecast, we're looking at a debt term of 20 years with a 2.5% interest rate, which is a very favorable interest rate. And then our operating reserve, we want to maintain 25% of our cost for operations, and we want to maintain a capital reserve level of about $1 million a year. So we looked at those targets to make sure as we move forward, we were covering all those things and keeping, you know, in mind that we don't want to do sudden increases. We looked at some things there, and we came up with a recommended plan. And what I want to do is have Dave Nauman, who was the project manager doing the day-to-day work on this, talk about that overall plan. So Dave?
Thank you, Ted. And again, my name is Dave Nauman, and I'll walk you through the details of the rate study. What you see here on the first slide is a summary of rate revenue by class. So as Randy mentioned, your revenues are primarily achieved through residential customer class. You can also see on this chart the university, commercial, and industrial, and then some other miscellaneous revenues. But you'll see it's a flat revenue forecast. As Ted was mentioning, we prudently forecast for revenues to remain stable over the 10-year study period. In terms of funding the capital plan, we took into consideration the recommendations that Randy has made. Brian and his folks also have some other projects that are on the radar, including meter replacement and some additional water main replacement renewal that's forecasted over the first 5 years. So your total capital plan to be funded is about $18.5 million over that 10-year period. You can see on the first graph there with the CIP program, the blue section of that bar represents the facility CIP, so the things that Brian's staff have explicitly forecasted for. And then the top portion of that bar is the renewal and replacement program that Randy was talking about here just a moment ago. The graph on the bottom of that slide will show you the capital funding plan. And that orange portion is what's funded through rates. So you're primarily funding or meeting your capital needs through annual revenues generated. It's pay-as-you-go. About 80% of your capital plan is funded that way. We are recommending 3 debt issuances through the IEPA, and you can see them illustrated here in green. One in 2016, one in 2018 and a final one in 2020. Overall, that's a relatively low use of debt. A lot of our clients, the relationship is the opposite. They might be looking at funding 80% of their capital plan through debt. It's actually a credit to your system that you can afford to do it this way. So when we look at your total revenue requirements, what this chart does is it compares the cash obligations in the bars to the black line, which is your revenue under existing rates. And you can see over time that the revenue under existing rates is not sufficient to meet those requirements. The bulk of your cost structure is related to operation and maintenance expense. You do see the red represents existing debt, and it does amortize off. It's retiring over the 10-year period. The green represents the portion of additional debt that's being proposed, and that purple bar would illustrate the pay-as-you-go capital component. In order to meet that funding gap, we're proposing a 4.5% revenue adjustment over the next 5 years, then returning to your current practice, which is increasing rates at a level commensurate with the CPI. So we forecasted that to be about 1.5% a year. And as Ted was mentioning, in the industry, overall rates have risen over the last 20 years at a clip of about 5 to 5.5, almost 6%, depending on which survey tool you look at. So the fact that you can accomplish your capital planning needs, maintain your balances, and adequately fund your operation and maintenance expense with 4.5% increases is actually, it's a pretty favorable financial plan compared to a lot of communities that we've looked at. Now, we looked at several scenarios over the last few months and alternative ways to approach funding it. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And in your packets, what you'll see is there should be a page, looks kind of like this. It's got some summary comparisons for 3 of the scenarios that we looked at. I want to just give you a flavor for some of the different things that we evaluated and different ways you could finance your plan. It's summarized at a very high level on the current graph. And this shows you the percent of annual adjustments. The blue line represents the 4.5% in the scenario that I just discussed. We also looked at, that's really what scenario 1 is on that table that you'll see. Scenario 2 was a little more of a rip the Band-Aid off approach. We tried to implement higher increases initially, so 8.5% per year for the first 2 years. That does allow you to return to a CPI-based adjustment at 1.5% more quickly. But we looked at that 8.5% as relatively disruptive. It's a fairly high revenue increase, and for that reason, we didn't recommend it, although that was one of the alternatives we looked at. Another alternative we looked at was a slightly lower increase. So if you were to implement 4% per year, but do that over a longer period of time, how far could you get in the implementation of your capital plan? And what we found was it just wasn't quite enough. It comes close to funding your total CIP, but not entirely. And as Randy mentioned, and as some others have mentioned here in the room, there's some benefits to be gained in implementing that renewal and replacement program that we think make the additional 4.5, or the additional 0.5%, the 4.5% a year increase worth it. So that really summarizes what was step 1 that Ted described on the prior page. We've also gone through cost of service analysis and rate design, and what I'll show you here in the next couple of slides are our recommendations for rate adjustments. We looked at your existing rate structure. It's composed of a fixed fee that varies by meter size, and then a price per 100 cubic feet for the volume that's used. It applies to all volume for all classes. And it's a very common structure that's in existence in the water industry today. Based on our cost of service analysis, it looks to be fairly equitable for your existing ratepayers. So we recommended maintaining that current rate structure. You'll see on the slide for proposed rates the new rates that are proposed in comparison to the existing rates. So there is an increase in both that fixed fee charge as well as the volumetric rate. These rates produce the 4.5% increase that's necessary for 2016. We then look at what that impact is for different customer classes in typical bill form. So we look at their bill under existing rates and the bill under the proposed rates and evaluate that difference. And what you'll see is the impact varies depending on the level of usage, but it is fairly consistent For an overall system increase of 4.5%, most users are going to see in the range of a 4 to 5% increase depending on their usage profile. It amounts for a typical residential user to about $1.46 a month. And again, that increase is below a lot of industry standards. And what you'll see on the following slide here is that it has really minor impact on your positioning within the typical bill survey that we did. So that $1.46 does not materially change where your current typical bill resides. And the other thing to keep in mind is that these communities that are on the survey will also likely be looking at increasing their rates as well. Not everybody does it every year, but over time that will be a dynamic that will push the other communities up.
Just a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you go back one?
Yeah.
So if you look at senior citizen, you indicated 56 cents, right?
Correct.
And that's the usage fees?
That's both the increase in the usage as well as the service fees. So that typical bill that's represented under existing and proposed rates includes both components. It'd be an overall increase of 56 cents a month.
Just the base water service fee goes from $15 to $16.50, is that right?
Correct. But that's per quarter.
Per quarter.
Correct. So it's about $5 a month in existing. You're welcome.
I'm sorry, Mike Burbin.
And this proposal is referring to 4.5% increases each year for the next 5 years?
Each year for the next 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That really concludes the material that we've prepared, and we'd be happy to address any other questions you might have.
Alderman Noriko.
I have a question for city staff. Since, as Chairman Peddle pointed out, our water, quote-unquote, water bill also includes some other factors. Do we know for waste management how much of an increase we're going to see on our bills because of increase in their fees?
That's a contractual agreement that we have. I think it's 3 years right now, right, Mark? The current agreement?
They have a 7-year agreement.
7 year?
Or a 5-year with a 2-year extension.
Do you know what the percent increase each year is?
I do not have that in front of me.
We
Kathy?
I don't know the increase. There is an annual increase built into that contract. I can get that for you and bring it back on Wednesday.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Okay.
And when that comes up, I hope we get a little bit more restrictive as a council. That was a long-term contract that I didn't like at the time. And it did go up probably 3 to 5% a year.
Just a follow-up question. The sanitary district, are they proposing an increase as well?
Their increases take effect every January of every year, so they'll start discussing that pretty soon, and typically they also increase. They've had an annual increase as well. If I can jump in at this point, we are working with the sanitary district currently. There's an item on the council agenda for May 26th to basically open the current IGA. To end it, we have to give 6 months' notice. It ends the end of December. So we've been talking with Mark Eddington. We're going to kind of redesign the current IGA the way we receive dollars to do their billing is kind of incorporated into the rate structure. So we'd like to make that a little more transparent and show, exactly how much we are receiving to do their monthly billing. So those negotiations are going to start June, first part of June. We're also looking at several things with water as we go through this process, maybe do every other month billing cycle instead of every 3 months. So combining 2 of those routes, the 2 small ones into one, and then, half of the city would be billed 1 month and the other half would be billed the other month. That helps determine leaks a lot quicker. The residents aren't getting such a large bill. So there's a lot of factors that make that beneficial. So we are looking at several little things with the water system currently.
Alderman Jacobs.
In terms of MIU's rates, are they paying, the same fair rate than a regular resident? Are they able to negotiated rate of a, how does that work?
They're paying the same rates that the other retail users pay. And they're connected to your system, and Brian, keep me honest, but they're connected to your system in multiple meter sizes too, right? There's many
Correct,
different
yeah.
connections.
The meters are inside the buildings themselves, so we have hundreds of meters at NIU, but they pay the same rate, which is based on consumption. It used to be back in the 90s that it was on a tiered system, or tiered, almost like a ladder system, where the more water you used, the cheaper the water became. So that was done away with in the late 90s. Now it's just a flat rate.
Chair Peddle?
For clarity, IGA is intergovernmental agreement, and because the sanitary district is a separate governmental unit with taxing authority, in order to put their rates on our bills and in order to provide a complete system of water and sanitary and stormwater, we have to have an intergovernmental agreement to make that work.
Thank you.
Alderman Noriko.
When I was going through the material that was sent to us ahead of time, I saw under the proposed cost increases, it appeared that residential customers would see an increase of 5.6%, and NIU would see a decrease of 0.5%. And I was wondering if I had correctly interpreted the chart, or...
That was a chart comparing cost of service to revenue under existing rates.
Oh, okay.
So what that tells you is it gives you an indication of equity within the current rate structure.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mentioned earlier that we felt overall your current rate structure was fairly equitable. There was not a lot of variance among the customer classes in terms of the cost of service results, which is a positive sign. For a lot of communities that we evaluate, there can be a lot of variance among the customer classes in terms of equity, and in this case, it was pretty uniform.
Okay, okay, thank you. I'm glad I asked.
Good. Other questions? Okay.
Well, we just wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us to thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to complete this study for you, and it's been a pleasure working with your staff. And you have a good staff on hand, and they've been very forthcoming with information, answering our questions, reviewing the results that we put together for you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the presentation, questions and discussion. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 5 of and continue the capital budget discussions at that point. There are coffee and bagels in the back room. Anyone is welcome to partake of those. The water study? As we reconvene from break, I will turn to Director Haley to continue our discussion on the water rates and relate the water fund into the current budget document that we have before us. So, Director Haley.
Okay, so continuing on with the water theme, I do have a PowerPoint that Byron is hopefully bringing up, but I want to make sure to make it clear, the water rate study recommendation has not been incorporated into the current budget that we were treating as a separate action item. So the current budget just shows kind of status quo where our rates go up annually by this 1.5% or the CPI. And there's also no water main replacements currently budgeted in fiscal 16. The fiscal 15 First Street water main improvement project is just getting started. So that will not be completed by the end of fiscal 15. There'll be money carried over in 16, and then there'll be work still being done in fiscal 16 for water main replacement on that phase 2 on First Street. But that is the only water main replacement in the budget. So.
And how much is that?
700,000, although it's been supplemented by some CDBG money.
So total cost is about $1 million.
$1 million. So that's at the running rate that they were talking.
Correct, yeah, it's about $500 a foot.
Okay, so with that, fiscal 2016 revenues are budgeted at about just over $5 million. They're slightly lower than the fiscal 2015 amended budget dollars. There's been a trend of water revenue kind of slowly going down. A lot of people are being more conservative, conserving more money. It can be due to more vacant property, foreclosures, and then just typical water-saving fixture devices that are out there now. Those are very common and very popular. So we are seeing a slight trending down in water. Could also depend on the season, if it's a wet season, dry season. So there's fluctuation with revenue streams. The fiscal 16 expenditures showed a very large decrease. Primarily, we are now no longer budgeting for depreciation. Typically, governments budget for spending measurements and outflow of resources. There is no outflow of resources with depreciation, and I think it's just easier not to budget for that. If you take that out, the decrease is only about 5.16%. We did add a new fund. We took out the capital portion of the water fund as it relates to impact fee revenue. Impact fee revenue is very restricted, used for, and Brian, you can jump in anytime if I'm not speaking correctly, but used for new water main lines and construction. So we've segregated that out from the water operating fund. The water operating fund, however, does still include capital costs for water main replacements that aren't new, just our regular water main capital plan. So at the end of fiscal 16, we're showing cash and cash equivalents within the water fund based on what's in the budget at about $3.198 million. As was stated, our fund balance policy, if you take out about 25% of expenditures, we're left with about $1.86 million to cover costs related to capital and infrastructure, which is well above the $1 million goal that we've set in our policy. Just keeping in mind there is nothing currently in the budget for water main replacements except what's being done in 15.
Okay, but Kathy, just to make clear in my mind, that means we're building $859,000 above our financial goal in that water capital fund, correct?
Above our policy, correct.
Okay, so we'd have $850,000 available for potential water main replacement or other capital needs.
Yep.
In the water fund?
Yes.
Okay.
So
a fairly conservative assumption then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Some of the assumptions within the water fund, again, with salaries, The AFSCME union contract, which has been ratified, affected the water fund by $12,468. The non-bargaining unit employee costs, which incorporates the changes through the pay and comp study, moving to a 40-hour work week, and the economic adjustment being in effect January 1, 2016, is about $18,204.
Kathy?
Yep.
Those are incremental, right? Can we make sure that in the presentations, that the AFSCME union contract cost isn't $12,468? It's
Exactly.
the incremental cost. And, I think everybody in the room understands that, but if somebody saw this, they may not understand that that's just the increase.
Yes. Thank you. Other staffing assumptions that are incorporated in the budget.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
about that? If we look at staff salary assumptions and so forth, when we talk about total compensation, the rate of increase in total compensation with all the elements, what would that amount to? Medical, I don't know what the medical assumption is, 7%, 8%?
No, health insurance, we've kind of stayed at status quo, where we incorporated a savings this year, which we, and I probably didn't talk about this with the water fund. I did talk about it during the general fund. There was a savings with health insurance.
It was about
So-
$250,000.
About over $200,000 savings to the general fund. There was some savings to the water fund with that as well. So I can get those for you and bring them back Wednesday, but there was nothing, no increase to health insurance because of the savings.
And then the pension increase?
The pension for IMRF, again, it was lower. Our IMRF rate went down. The two, police and fire, that's incorporated with the pension levy, so that doesn't affect the water fund.
Great, thank you.
So the two staffing positions, 25% and 10% correspondingly do affect the water fund for these two positions. We are just incorporating 8 months' worth of salary at this point in time for these two positions, and started them at the minimum of the salary range. Also, hiring a new full-time water division employee has been factored into this budget. Some of the new requests that are also incorporated in the budget, outsourcing water bill printing. I want to emphasize the printing part. This is about an annual cost of $40,000. However, we will capture a savings by eliminating a maintenance cost. We have one dedicated printer just for water bills currently. There's a maintenance cost to that. There's a copy overage cost to that, totaling over $20,000 annually just in that. Just our staff time, freeing up our staff time. We are up here monitoring and babysitting the machine to refill the paper, to work on jams. We also then fold and seal the bills. So this would eliminate staff time so they can be available for the phone calls that are downstairs and would not have to have them go to voicemail. The difference between this is about a $10,000 a year hit to the water fund, which is nominal. I think the other aspect of outsourcing, it becomes an 8.5 by 11 bill. The city can incorporate inserts or memos with this bill, so it's a means of larger communication to the residents, which is also nice. Purchasing a new backhoe and hammer drill is incorporated in here.
Is there any opportunity for revenue? I mean, when you get your ComEd or Nicor or Comcast bill, there's all sorts of advertisements, there's all sorts of stuff, and then they're clearly getting paid to do that. I mean, do we have some options there to recoup that loss in some of those opportunities?
Great question. I don't know. I can check maybe with Dean to see if we can put any type of advertising. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can check on the legal perspective, but I can say on the operational perspective, I've not seen other municipalities do that. Typically, municipalities like to control the message and be able to use it, whether it's for special events, but we can definitely look into that.
And I will go into more detail on the new financial software when I talk about capital, but there's a portion of the financial software recommendation or request that will affect water as well. Total dollars in capital and water is about $250,000. And this is meant to replace what we currently have, which is MSI.
Forgive me, I want to take a step back, follow up on Dave's comment. If I understand what you're proposing, you want to go to a different type of billing system other than using these nice little forms that have an envelope that the customer then puts their check in and sends it back?
We are looking to outsource the process of the printing to go, now, everything is, we would obviously be going out for a quote on the process, but the three individuals or businesses we spoke with, it's an 8.5 by 11 bill. They can incorporate a number 9 envelope in there for return. You know, just snip off your receipt, put it in an envelope, and still provide that service to the residents if we so choose to do that. So they would still have that convenience.
Well, I mean, that's a service that many mailing companies can provide, or even print shops or copy shops, or somebody out of their garage with just one piece of equipment. Why not take it to the next step, which I did in my business a couple of years ago, and make it so that everyone can go to a website and they get emailed their bill. They can go to a website, just automatically have that payment made by credit card every month, and nobody touches anything.
I would love to do that. Our current software doesn't allow for that. The software that I hope we can go to and move to would allow for e-bills and that process and that payment. I think individuals do get their water bills, they can get them emailed to them currently, but the online portion of that is a little clunky still, so. But I think that's absolutely the way the city should be moving forward, so.
And
the
what
business-
software is that, Kathy?
That
You say doesn't allow that?
MSI,
Okay.
January 2013.
We were told when we did that there would be online, there would be all
It's-
those functionality things, that's why we paid to go to MSI.
It's my understanding that MSI did communicate to the city that it was going to go to a version 8, a sequel version, and they never followed through on that. MSI is now, I'll just go right into the MSI stuff. MSI is going to be discontinued. The parent corporation is called Harris Computers. So they're no longer going to be supporting the MSI division that they purchased, I'm not sure how many years ago. And MSI is now. We didn't pay for the upgrade yet. So we paid for the COBOL-based system that we're currently using. And they are not going to go to a sequel version. They do have an offer to migrate up to what they're calling Smart Fusion. We've had demonstrations on it. I've done a lot of, back and forth with them. It's a very, the money that I've put in here is about $250,000. It equates to basically going back to Munis. We would, of course, still do a full RFP to be going to this service. The migration that Harris or MSI is recommending, it's very, seems to be based for school districts and library districts. It's very simplistic, it's very simple, while it's a SQL-based program, so the functionality is a little easier to use. It doesn't have a building permit module, and it's very basics, and it's still, I think, almost $100,000 to migrate to that. So if we were to flip back, just turn that switch back on to go to Munis, they had given us a quote of about $250,000. I've talked to some colleagues who've done full-blown RFPs recently. The top 2 vendors out there that are kind of sweeping across Illinois right now are New World and Munis, and they're getting dollars in that are over $500,000 to move to those 2 softwares. So it's
Mike Verbeck.
So that is the cost of the e-bill software that we would need?
no, the $250,000.
Yeah, what is the cost of the e-bill software to facilitate what?
That's incorporated within moving back to Munis. they would have that functionality for us built
Okay.
into it.
And this would be an upgraded version of the Munis we were using
Correct.
2 years ago.
Right.
Correct.
And we would have a HRIS module, so we'd actually have a database, a system for our employee data and reporting and legal reporting and compliance that we have to run, all within the Munis module, which MSI doesn't even have that module for us to utilize at this time.
Chair Peddle?
I think it's important to note that you could not go to straight e-billing and require people to pay their bills online. And you might actually end up losing money on the proposition because you lose the economies of scale in printing your bills. I don't like it any more than you do. I prefer to pay my bills online, but you cannot require somebody to pay their bill online, nor can you require them to have e-bill.
Well, I'm going to jump in. My business, I'm going to say about 3% did, when we were without the website, paid by credit card or tried to pay through their bank, ACH. And within 2 years, over 80% were paying that way. Made it- I'm just giving you a fact, and and this is crazy, $250,000, the software, that you could take a business software, or, and somebody has to input all this stuff anyway, I would think.
The
The 250 is not
250,000.
just e-bill.
It's our total financial software. It's purchase orders, it's general ledger, it's accounts payable, it's payroll, it's water billing. It's a completely new financial software. We would get rid of MSI altogether because, again, MSI is no longer going to be being supported. So that's not the e-bill software. That e-bill is a portion of the total financial software. And it's certainly my intention to promote more online payments. But we need to get to a point where we have a software that is working efficiently with every aspect of water billing, and every aspect of payroll, and every aspect of accounts payable, and purchase orders. Purchase orders, we don't even do them online yet, so we want to get purchase orders online. We don't have anything human resource related online, so we want to get that online. So that's for all of that. That's the whole package.
I just caution that if you outsource this, I don't think you need to do it for more than 1 year, because you'll find that a simple computer can take care of all of this and print right through the copier in the other room. If you
Yep,
don't
and-
have the updated version of that copy equipment, I'll help you figure it out. But, I mean, everything is just leapfrogged in the last couple of years here.
Right. And I wouldn't.
And I don't want to go to something that I consider is a couple of years old, when we can go to what's available today and be good for 5 or 10 years at least.
And that outsourcing of the printing would be an annual contract, year by year.
Okay. I just look at that as a Band-Aid, because it's to create a system where the people have the option of figuring out how to ACH from their checking account and credit card. It's only going to take a couple of years before most people prefer that.
I agree with that, and I don't want to be misunderstood.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said.
I want an option for e-billing, and I want to pay my bill
It's going to cut.
online.
Yeah.
So you've got, you're preaching to the choir with respect to that. We do have to deal with that other 20%, but,
No, that's
we gotta
fine.
see how it works out. No, but we're fine.
Alderman O'Leary, do you have a question? Speak to the microphone, please.
So what do we?
Closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I
can hear you all along.
Okay, so when we switched to this other software in 2013, what did we pay for then? Because I was told that we were gonna have, they're gonna be able to communicate and get online, and so what did we actually pay for then? What did we pay for?
If I look back at the council report, it looked like it was about $195,000 that was purchased for this software.
And did we get our money's worth out of this?
If you want,
I know you wasn't here then, so I know I'm asking you questions that, before you, but.
I don't want to speak because I think that the city was promised to go to this version 8 sequel version that was going to do a lot. The version that the city is currently on, I can tell you, is almost identical to what I used 15 years ago when I was in West Dundee. And it's a COBOL-based system. It is archaic.
I heard cobalt, and boy,
Yeah.
I studied that in college, that was a long
Right.
time ago.
Right, that was, yeah. Oh,
My
wow.
question is, if the promises were made that we were going to be going to an 8, and that's what lured us over to them.
Tom?
Do we have any recourse to the company and saying, hey, we spent all this money because you promised us this, and now your promises didn't come through, we want that money back?
Again, we didn't pay for the upgrade to version 8. I can certainly talk with Dean if he thinks it's something worth going to the. I have been very clear to them how.
I remember when we had the discussion, the reason we were going to MSI is because it integrated better with some of our other software, whether it was police or fire or other modules that they were saying, that's why they pushed it, saying this was part of the total software package we were gonna see.
Right.
MSI does not integrate with anything for police and fire. Please speak if I'm wrong, but we also do a lot in an access database to supplement what the inefficiencies that come across with MSI. We're doing a lot of Excel spreadsheets because of the inefficiencies with MSI. So, no, again, I don't know what that version 8 would have been, that pie in the sky version 8 that didn't come
why
to
don't-
fruition.
Kathy, we're going to, in council, in FAC, we're going to be revisiting this whole MSI discussion, aren't we?
Now
But
we,
I don't want to get bogged down in,
we better be.
where we were.
Yeah, I think there's two issues. Number one, we'll research with the city attorney to see if there's any recourse to address Alderman Jacobson's question as far as going back in time. But number two, the main issue is the recommendation of moving forward, that the current MSI software is not supporting the needs of the city, and because of the way that company is structured, will not support the needs in the future. Therefore, staff is making a recommendation to migrate back to Munis, which will be able to accomplish probably many of the things that had been talked about in regards to MSI, and fully integrate the various departments from building permits to HR to everything to be able to support the departments. So that's the key thing. We will go back and check and hopefully have more information by next Wednesday.
Okay.
Hey, if we have to do an RFP or go back or whatever, I'd like to, get efficient and just lick our wounds and fix this. Thank you.
Also, even on the other day, we had on Tuesday, when we had our meetings, and I was listening to all the information they were saying about the IT and everything, and I'm just sitting here like, wow, I thought we had upgraded everything, I thought the police get theirs and the fire, and they're gonna all work together, and now I'm like, we're deficient in this area, and I'm like, so what did we do? I mean, what did we purchase? What happened? Because I thought we had upgraded all of these things, and because that's what they told us, oh, we're gonna be able to go to other communities and look at all kinds of things, and I'm like, wow, we're this deficient in the IT area, and what was told to us obviously didn't happen. So I'm sitting here just puzzled about what really happened in this area. Because I really thought we were upgraded, especially with the police, the fire, and everything else.
I think it's a difficult question for staff to answer as far as Director Haley and myself, because it predates us. We can provide the historic information that we've been able to research, but to go back as to.
Yeah, I'll bring my stuff in too, because I have all mine. I'll bring mine in, yeah. All the information that I was given, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Just a quick
Connie.
question. If we did spend the 250, would we immediately be able to have all of these services available? We wouldn't be waiting for any upgrade or anything. It would be an instant gratification as far as being able to use the new software and move on.
I can tell you I've gone through 2 full software conversions, so immediate, while the system immediately could do it, it is a long process to do it correctly and to set up everything in the background correctly and to migrate over to the new software.
How long do you think it would take us to do that?
I would say 6 to 8 months.
But they're assuring us that this is a software that's for the future.
Right. The
Yes.
functionality is there with the
Okay.
software. I used Munis most recently 4 months ago in Schaumburg. All of the functionality is there.
That's my
The
question.
implementation time for staff to build the codes behind the scene and do the transition, the crosswalks and everything needed would take about 6 to 8 months.
No, I was asking about the functionality.
Yes.
That's what we need to have.
Yes, the Village of Schaumburg, which I came from 4 months ago, was fully, Munis was the enterprise system, and we had building codes, code inspection, building permits, human resources, integrating with fire and police, all up and running and functioning, e-billing for water payments through our website, which the new website for the city will provide that functionality and be able to do that with the appropriate software, which we do not have today.
So the software we had before was the same name, and they've improved it. Is that what you're saying?
Quite honestly, I don't know if we know why we transitioned out of Munis. Do we?
I don't know why we transitioned out of Munis either. I came from a Munis
be a full
environment as well.
No. I think we need to just move on.
Yes.
So moving on, 2 other new requests in the water fund. A new GPS device to replace an old GPS device. And then, again, to explain, we are decreasing the transfer from the water fund. We're now just calculating based on the EPI recommendation, payment in lieu of property taxes comes out to about $258,000. And then we're directly hitting salaries to the water fund of $560,929. So it's kind of an offset, just showing it to be a little more transparent that these are salaries.
What is the payment in lieu of taxes? Is that for pension?
No, that's based on water property valuations, less depreciation times our current tax rate. So payment in lieu of property taxes. This came out of the EPI study that this is an allowable transfer to support the general
Yeah,
fund.
I understand that, but I don't understand what the basis of, who's, a payment in lieu of taxes is a payment that would be otherwise owed for services for something that taxes are not being paid on. So what's the water fund is not currently supported by property taxes, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so what is the water fund paying for?
The water fund and this is my understanding when I read the EPI study, and it's an allowable revenue stream from the water fund to the general fund based on the study. They're also not paying anything property tax-wise, so the general fund is not receiving any type of property tax assistance from EAV, estimated assessed valuation of the property that's water property, or wells, or,
The water system asset
Yes.
is not paying
Yes.
taxes, is that the?
right.
Direct, okay. And we were always told years ago we could grab about 500 grand to cover
Yeah,
the
no,
billing
I-
problem of our labor involved.
So basically, this is paying ourselves, this is what would have been owed if the water system's property was taxed.
Correct.
Okay, fine, that's all I wanted to know, thank you.
Just one question as we go on. What's the addition, what is the additional position?
Maybe Brian can, yep, your new position?
Yeah, the position itself would be a water maintenance position. That would be incorporated into our utility crew. Currently, we have a 2-man or 2-person utility crew. And the utility crew is responsible for water main breaks, service repairs, hydrants, valve repairs. That's their primary responsibility. Going kind of back in history, when we had the layoffs back in 2008, 2009, the water division went from 16 people down to 10. The most critical, in my opinion, loss that we had at that time was taking our utility crew from 3 people down to 2. Utility crew back in 2003 or so was a 4-person crew. Went to 3 in 2003, went to 2 in 2008 or 2009 when the layoffs occurred. We have gone out and, since that time, I've actually fought for this position back. Not all 6 positions, but 1 position back, primarily because of the safety factor. We've gone out and dug water main breaks with a 2-man crew, 1 person in the backhoe, 1 in the hull, and that's just a very, very unsafe condition. Obviously, we tried not to do that, but it has occurred. It's occurred very often. When we're able to get another person, it's usually kind of we pull a person from either the street division or from the water division, whoever's available. Unfortunately, that person just doesn't have the training that's needed to properly do the job. And we try to cross-train, but it's not the type of job that you can be in 3 or 4 times a year. It's a daily job. It's knowing where the person is at when you're digging, where you're supposed to be at. It's understanding the signals. If someone's in the backhoe and you're trying to dig and you're digging around electrical, you're digging around fiber optic, you're digging around high-pressure gas mains. It's knowing what your job duties are during that time. And so we made do, and I understood the layoffs, and I'm not here to criticize the layoffs or anything, but the position is definitely critically needed. It's honestly, it's an accident waiting to happen. I can't be any more blunt than saying that. We need a 3-person crew. Those people need to work together on a daily basis to understand what the job is and to be fully trained. It's just not a job. And I've been out there on main breaks before, and it's like my dad always said, you know, if you can't help, don't hinder. And if you're out there and you don't understand what you're doing, you're actually a hindrance. I mean, you can be a hindrance. And so it's really put a lot of pressure, on myself, but even more so on our crew leader, Mike Taylor, who does a phenomenal job. But it's very, very difficult to constantly have to train basically a new employee each time. And a lot of times these breaks are coming in at, they're coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're out there digging in the middle of the night. It's 20 below zero. You don't want to have to train a new employee, essentially a new employee, I shouldn't say that. But someone that doesn't have the experience, they want to get in and out and back home as quick as possible. So.
Alderman Van Nupen.
So Kathy, this is more of a general question and it doesn't apply specifically just to water, but if the Water Enterprise Fund has to borrow an employee like that from another department, does that enterprise fund pay back that department? Is there a chargeback system so Public Works recovers the cost of that employee from the enterprise fund?
There is currently now, this budget season, we're doing an annual assessment of staff. So if there's staff that's cross-trained, now this is past practice, but between streets and water, there's an annual split. So it's each year. There's not, except in the case of possible snow plowing overtime costs, I've seen that being recouped. If there's a water staff person plowing, I don't even know if that happens, but we would recoup overtime. We would not hit the water fund with that.
I want to make sure, though, that for the enterprise funds, that those costs are truly attributed to those enterprise funds and not being picked up as part of the general fund costs either by Public Works or somebody else, so that those true costs of the enterprise funds are identified, so that that we keep our general fund on track that way.
Yep.
Okay.
Alderman Jacobson.
And looking at the last bullet on this slide, directly in the water fund with salaries, I'm guessing that's where the $500,000 difference over 15 and 16 comes in.
Correct.
Where was that money being billed prior to?
It was hitting the salaries. So I'll give you an example. Our water billing clerks, her salaries were all coming out of salaries in the general fund. That large transfer was meant to kind of offset the fact that she does almost 100% of water billing. So now we're directly hitting.
Into my next question. if that was the case, and again, that's always how it's been sold to us, was that large transfer of 500,000 was to cover the incidentals and other employees out of the department. If the enterprise fund is now covering those salaries, why is there still a $500,000 reimbursement going into the general fund?
There's not, I'm not sure what page you're looking at, but the transfer went down to 258,000. So it was at 702,000, it dropped to 258,000, so it's not.
Pilot now.
Yep.
Okay. Kathy?
So, airport? We have-
Alderman Baker?
Okay, it's at 258, but we were always told we could go up to around 500,000. Do we need to make it only 258, or is our plan to raise it back up so we have some more money to the general operating fund?
I think it was such a large amount because we were not directly hitting expenditures to the water fund, which we are now. So we're directly hitting salaries, FICA, IMRF costs to the water fund instead of that $500,000. So
So
I
it's a
can
more-
justify 258 on the payment in lieu of taxes, that transfer. Beyond that, you know, I'd have to justify that transfer, so.
So Kathy, the current procedure is more transparent, more accountable by the water fund, correct?
Correct.
So our objective is to become more transparent and more accountable.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but we were always sold this is how you can take some of the profits from the water and put it in the general fund to operate the city. And I understand the justification of maybe accounting-wise, or if the IRS were auditing, which is not going to be the case. 258,000 is justifiable, but we're not allowed to take a profit and put it in the general fund? Is that really what's coming down? We're trying to just break even on this and call it a service, except for the 258, because I'm not sure that 258 is a good enough return on the investment if
Kathy,
that's what we're
correct me
looking
if
at.
I'm wrong, wouldn't those audits go through those components of the water fund? And
Yes.
justify those direct costs that are
Yes.
being charged there?
Yes.
So, you know, to me, it's more transparent and accountable if those are direct costs to the water fund rather than a lump sum transfer.
Right.
Annually. Chair Peddle?
With due respect, if you're making profits in the water fund, as a citizen, I'm
Lower
gonna
your
have a
rates.
cow.
Lower your rates.
I'm gonna have a cow if you're
Oh,
gonna go increase the rates on the basis of the costs of running the water fund. You know, the whole point of an enterprise fund is to run it like a business, and you can have a fund balance, which we're going to have to be able to pay for the water main replacement and depreciation and the like. But the point of an enterprise fund is not to make a profit to support your operations.
Well,
Just a different kind of comment, if I could, relative to the discussion. In the past, that 500,000 was raised to 700,000, I think, last year, along the line. So there was 700,000 that was being charged to the water fund and benefiting general fund. And that was to support all the people involved and so forth. Now you've done a detailed analytic, and instead of 700,000, you came up with 560 plus the pension costs and the overhead costs that go with that 560. So you're really very close to the same 700,000 that you had before that you were transferring, and this just rationalizes it in a more thorough way of doing the analysis to support that 700,000. You're pretty much in the same position, pretty close to the same position you were.
Well, where I'm going with this, and I agree with what Mike Peddle said. I tried to preface it with, I'm not sure which way we would argue it, but as a consumer, I would not want to pay extra into the water bill knowing it's just going into the general fund, because real estate taxes are supposed to go there, sales taxes, everything else that we operate out of. But the mention earlier in the presentation, what if a large company came to the city and they wanted to, well, like Lithico Seed Company 30 years ago or whatever, went to one of these big European or I think French-based companies came to Malta and they wanted to use millions of gallons of water. And Malta didn't work it out with them. They really should have, I think. But we didn't get the opportunity in DeKalb maybe. But my point is, where I'm going is that we might have an opportunity to make a huge incremental profit on water. And that goes to, why would we want to give them that at the cost to our citizens? If we're going to make a profit, we'd want it to go into the general fund so that we could lower our costs overall, or be able to use it elsewhere than just the water, wouldn't we? Or are we, I mean, I'm kind of trying to think in advance, because I'm anticipating, because we have this cheap water compared to the suburbs and people draining from Lake Michigan, I wouldn't be surprised if something like that comes up in the very near future, where we have a chance to develop in our industrial with a heavy water user. And I think we need to be prepared with the philosophy of, you know, are we just going to give it away and not get a good return on our investment for all that infrastructure? And I mean, $258,000 is nothing compared to the tens of millions of dollars that we have in place with our infrastructure.
Well, there's actually a couple of technical answers, and because you've raised the question, I will give a more technical answer than I would otherwise give. If DeKalb were a non-home rule jurisdiction, okay, the fee could be challenged because a fee cannot exceed the cost of services. And if it does, then it's a tax. And in order to have the authority to tax, you have to be given that authority by the state. As a home rule jurisdiction, we have the power to do taxation that non-home rule jurisdictions don't have. You know, I think it is a philosophical discussion for the city council. Personally, what it sounds like you're suggesting is price discrimination not based on cost, because the cost of servicing a large user is likely to be less per unit in terms of variable costs. And if you had a large user come in, then depending on where they came in, you would have the water impact fee, or you would have the impact fees, and you would also have the connection fees to recover the costs of the larger infrastructure. It's a complex question. I mean, I can see your point of view from the perspective of let's not give away the store, and let's do something to benefit the community as a bit of a quid pro quo. If there's an annexation agreement involved, you can negotiate that, and you're outside the realm of other kinds of law. You're in contract law. And so, I mean, there's nothing to stop you from negotiating that as part of an annexation agreement. But yeah, it's a complex question. It's interesting.
If it's a big enough user, we might have to sink another well, create another tower, and they're going to have to share or cover that cost. I'm just concerned about the gap between when we don't really have to change any infrastructure, getting and we get a good return on that, making sure that, I guess at that time the council has to decide. I'm just bringing it up so everybody remembers that. So when it does happen, that we decide, is that going to benefit just that company, or is it going to benefit all the citizens and spread the cost and maybe lower the cost of the water to the community?
And I think did I understand you right, Kathy, that we're not funding the depreciation in the water fund?
We're not budgeting for it.
Okay, so see, that's another thing that you could do if you were concerned about the hits in the future, is you could justify an increase in the rate to build up the balance by actually funding the depreciation, so that when the time comes to replace or drill a new well or accommodate a new user, that you have that money. So it's a matter of where this whole thing is a matter of where you want to account for things, and the argument that's being made is that accounting for things in the water fund and keeping them in the water fund, all the expenses, is, you know, a more transparent way. And we're saying, okay, the payment in lieu of taxes on the property, okay, we can take that and we can justify that, because if, but for the city owning that property, it would be taxable. Okay? If we want to do what Alderman Baker's suggesting, what we need to do is come up with another factor that allows us to make a defensible transfer to the general fund, which I haven't heard that reason yet, but I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. We just have to have a reason rather than a profit.
You're hitting on my concern with the not funding the depreciation. Many years ago, the council had to deal at a water rate increase time with the idea of we weren't putting money away to do those repainting of the water towers. And I'm shocked to hear that 700,000 or $1 million plus now, because it was 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 maybe the last time around 10 years ago, or however many years it goes. And it had to do with, do they have to sandblast it all the way down to the metal, and they have to get a different kind of paint off that they didn't want to have on in the future. I don't know all the details, but when you're not funding depreciation, does that mean no money is being set aside now?
No.
Help me out here.
No, we're just not budgeting for depreciation. We still, through the, and maybe if you want to step in anytime, that'd be great.
And I'm bringing that up because I see on one of the charts.
You indicated we're building the water capital fund $1.8 million.
Right, that's where our reserves are at.
But
Through the
I-
capital improvement
I see in the
process.
future, that green line on one of the bar charts for borrowing money. Is that because the capital fund isn't going to get up to the point it needs to be in time?
A couple of thoughts. The concept of funding depreciation is really it's an easy benchmark in the industry to represent the fact that your infrastructure is deteriorating over time and you need to be renewing and replacing it, preferably with cash, so that you're not running your assets into the ground. The plan that's been proposed is heavily funded through cash. So very little, about 20% of the overall capital improvement plan is funded through debt. It's very heavily funded through cash. And I don't know what your depreciation is in the water utility today off the top of my head, but you're contributing in the plan a number of assets through renewal and replacement annually. It's a healthy position based on the plan that we've developed.
So rather than putting the money aside for the rainy day, we're
reinvesting.
budgeting the money to invest as we go along.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Nothing got missed. I just wanted to make sure it didn't get missed. Thanks.
Alderman
I
Jacobson.
just had one quick other question, looking down the budget. Obviously, electric and gas are covered in this. What are the other utilities that we're budgeting $180,000 for?
Do you know off the top of your head? Oh, good.
The majority of that sanitary district, our treatment plants generate a lot of wastewater through the regeneration process and the backwashing
Use
of
the
the
mic.
iron filter.
Brian, use the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. And so when the regeneration occurs or the backwash occurs, that water actually goes into a pit in the basement of the treatment plant, then is pumped out slowly into the sanitary district, and it's metered as it's pumped out. I think it's $120,000 or so of that would be that portion of it. The rest of that, part of it is, even though we're the water fund, we basically pay ourselves for accountability reasons. Maybe Kathy can talk more to this, but, so we actually get a water bill for the water that we use. And then we basically are paying ourselves. That comes out of that fund, so it's money in, money out. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, and maybe it doesn't need to be done. I don't know. We've always done it that way, but I think it's an accounting thing. Same with the city hall here and everything. So part of that money is for that too.
That-
City manager.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You want to add?
That is, we are billing ourselves for water. That does come out of the other. It is a process we are going to look into, so.
What I was gonna suggest is, while we still have the 3 consultants here from Burns and McDonald's, I know they have to leave shortly, is to, before we finish the water fund, to go back to the water rate study and the structure, and to see if there's additional questions we can answer, or if there's some direction that you wanna give. So Director Haley had at your place setting today, this, I believe it's a 4-page document. On the front page was, just tried to have a simple snapshot so that you can see the funding differences, and the differences in the number of debt issues from scenario 1 to scenario 2 to scenario 3. And that cost that would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these numbers, any of the rate increases not currently factored into the water fund. So if you want to provide direction to have this incorporated into the fiscal year 16 budget, whether you want to have that discussion today, or whether you want to have a further discussion on Wednesday, or follow some other type of process, I think it would be beneficial for us as staff to know how you want to go about in that decision-making process. And we just want to utilize, once I said, again, the 3 consultants from Burns and McDonald before they have to leave the building.
Alderman Noriko.
In terms of the debt issues, there's a difference in terms of the number and obviously the amount. What's best practice or a threshold level?
Right. One of the principles that we used in developing financial plans for the water utility was a preference, to the extent that it was possible, to mitigate the use of debt. And so the scenarios that we've developed are take different approaches to using debt. Although I'll tell you, and I think I mentioned this in my prior comments in the presentation, the water utility cash flow is fairly healthy, and its ability to be able to implement the renewal and replacement program with 4.5% increases gives you further confidence in the financial capability of the utility. It's in pretty good shape. The debt issuance with the 4.5%, you have to go to the IEPA loan program a little more frequently to get through the next 5 to 6 years. But overall, it's only funding, the use of debt is only funding about 20% of your overall 10-year capital improvement plan. That's a favorable measure.
Mm-hmm.
The other programs, or the other scenarios that we looked at, access debt a little less frequently.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, if you don't use enough debt, there's a fine line here, but you're paying for assets that are going to last you 20 to 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so some use of debt is appropriate and defensible because you're spreading the cost of that infrastructure out and charging it against the ratepayers who will be customers at that time. Our recommendation would be scenario 3. Scenario 1, I'm sorry, scenario 1.
Well, okay, following, you said that it's preferable to decrease the amount of debt. But you're saying that scenario 1, which requires 3 issues and a total amount that's higher.
Let me clarify.
That- yeah.
There's a balancing act.
Okay.
Because the more debt that you use, your ability to implement the program with lower revenue increases becomes more feasible.
Mhm.
So
okay.
scenario
Okay.
2, you can use less debt, but you're going to have to implement 8.5% increases in 16 and 17 to
Okay.
get there.
Okay, so you're taking, in other words, you're taking a look at the total amount that you need and what's the amount from the debt issuance versus the revenue.
We were trying to strike as optimal
Okay.
a balance as we
Okay.
could.
Okay.
And scenario 4, even though it's indicated, scenario 3, I apologize, the last scenario on your page, only accesses the debt market once at $2 million, but it also wasn't sufficient to fund the total capital improvement program at that level either. So to me, the primary scenarios, the most meaningful scenarios, are the first one, which tries to take a phased implementation of those increases at 4.5% a year, or do you try and do it all at once? And from our point of view, the implementation at 4.5% a year is more feasible.
Yeah, remember, when we talked about overall goals at the beginning of this.
Use the microphone, please.
When we talked about overall goals at the beginning of the whole presentation on the rates, we were trying to minimize rate shock as far as large increases. So that's why the scenario one was a balancing act of moderate increases over a 5-year period as opposed to 2 very large increases.
Okay.
It's always a balance.
Okay, thank you.
Just one further question on debt. If we could, if we look at the structure that you have currently, you've got rate reduction, or debt reduction that occurs as we pay off our existing debt, right?
Correct.
Sometimes communities have looked to restructure debt. I'm not sure if this is restructurable or not, or if there's any cost savings associated with that, to string that out, to keep this cost down.
Well, given your overall level of debt, I don't see that there's a large opportunity in restructuring to have a lot of cost savings, because you're in a position where you're paying that debt off fairly quickly.
Right.
So this is just adding the additional debt. Whether you did that with 2 debt issues or 3, we tried to smooth this out by doing the 3.
Right, I understand that. So you're looking at $400,000 or $500,000 in debt payment now, I guess, roughly, if I look at the chart, maybe a little more than that up front, and then it scales back.
It does.
To less debt by 21, and it's eliminated at the end of 21. So there'd be no debt payment whatsoever on the current chart.
Right, under existing issues.
Yes.
Okay.
So you could look at this in the long term and structure around that, those debt payments if you so wanted, which would be another financing approach to lower the cost up front.
Yeah, and I'm not sure IEPA loans are refundable. I know I've looked into that
Well,
before.
if it's modest, it's probably not worth talking about.
Right.
Understand that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions on the water rate study?
And I think, once again, Mayor, does either the committee and/or the council want to provide any direction, or what is the process that you want to proceed forward in determining? Because once again, there's no rate increase factored into the current budget. Scenario 1 and 2, both those scenarios make a commitment to the cost of infrastructure. Scenario 3, we're not able to fully replace the amount of infrastructure that was outlined in the first presentation on the water infrastructure plan. So what is your pleasure as far as how you want to proceed in regards to looking at this? Do you want to make a decision today? What process do you want to follow?
Alderman O'Leary?
I would like to take this home and digest it more and then talk about it more on Wednesday.
I think discussion on Wednesday and possibly, let me just ask, is there consensus from council to come back to this issue of what needs to be incorporated in terms of FY16 and beyond? I'm seeing consensus to address it in the future.
Yeah, I just want to
Chair
make the
Pepper.
point that given that you also have the street issue, that considering all of the capital issues together to see the combined effect, I think would be recommended. I think it's a good idea to wait to discuss how you're going to balance those things.
Is there consensus from council focusing on scenario 1? Or Alderman O'Leary, are you suggesting you need more time to digest the scenarios in front of us?
No, I was looking at scenario 1, but I mean,
Okay.
just the overall, just to really look at it before
Yeah.
I say yes or no on it.
Okay. Do others have the interest in looking more seriously at scenario 2 or 3?
Well, I think as part of our discussion, we need to.
Use the mic.
I'm sorry. I think that as part of our discussion, we need to look at what the total percentage of the rate increase would be over the next 9 years. I mean, in scenario 1, we're looking at a percentage increase of 32.27% over the next 9 years. And that's not really spelled out here. And I think that's an important thing to note too, so that we know not just what it is for next
Year
year,
by year.
but what it is over the next 10 and what impact that will be on the water bills over that time.
And I can offer that among the 3 scenarios that you're looking at on that summary sheet, they all cumulatively affect your revenues by 32 to 33%. So it's a little coincidental, but there's not a lot of difference in the overall change. The other thing to recognize is that the practice of increasing your rates at a CPI level of 1.5%, for instance, per year, represents about 14 or 15% of that change. So the margin between that 32 and the 14 is really what you're talking about to fund the renewal and replacement.
Okay.
In addition to what Alderman Fanouken just said, is there any other information that either the city council or the finance advisory committee would want in relation to Wednesday's meeting about these rates?
Chair Peddle,
I'm sorry, I think
In there.
Alderman Jacobson had his hand
Alderman
up
Jacobson.
first. Okay.
Chair Peddle.
I would like to see if we could, given Bill's question, could we actually see the rates? Sure. Under the, the three scenarios, just see what the rates look like.
Yep. Mike Verba.
We touched on it earlier. If we could get these scheduled increases for waste management along with the sanitary district, just to see what that total impact of the bill could be. And then in a greater scope, if we could look at the overall budget and what are the total increases of all revenue, what are the total increases of all expenses not related to water? So whole budget, total revenue, total expenses. Not entire budget, not water specifically.
Okay. We have that in the budget draft in front of us.
But, yeah, it wasn't,
That's correct. The rate
Yep.
increase is not included. The
Okay. Right.
expenditures have been included, but the rate increase is not.
correct.
Okay.
Right.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry, I was
That's okay.
trying to clarify. Alderman Jacobson, work down.
Again, in looking at this and looking at water increases, it's my understanding, both through IML meetings I've been at and speaking to water, and I know TJ and I have the conversation regularly, that generally when you raise the rate, you almost get an almost exactly corresponding or drop in water, correct?
There's some
And
truth to
water
that.
usage,
Yeah, there is some truth to that as you raise rates,
even in terms
people
of raising.
try to
then
conserve.
These revenues aren't real revenues. If we raise it 5 and water usage goes down 5, we're at net zero still. And we've committed to a lot of debt and we don't have any revenue to pay for it.
Ted.
Yeah, typically, when you raise the rate, you will see an initial reduction, but over time, most customers will come back to their standard usage. Unless you have significant increases, in which case, then they're gonna try to find ways to just not use as much water.
I mean, in
But they
terms
still
of
have to take their showers, they still, all that is gonna happen.
being that we have increased several times over the years, what are our trends, and that's something I'd like to see, what are our trends based on those increases? Have those usage numbers ever rebounded, or are we still looking at significantly less water needs?
We've had falling rates of about 2.5% every year since 2005.
When we
So
started
for the
the
past 10 years, water sales have fallen 2.5% every year.
And they
On
go up
average.
1.5% every year.
And the CPI has averaged about 1 to 1.2%. So quite honestly, we've actually lost money, lost revenue, I would
Lost
say.
revenue generation, and I would say some of that, it's not a direct correlation. So you are correct with your comment, but we also have to take into consideration over the last 10 years how much more efficient certain types of plumbing have become, other things have become, and it's not, I don't want to say it's a misnomer, I just want to say that it's really not a one-to-one. I think part of it is water conservation, improved plumbing, improvements within municipalities in terms of leak detection, and there's been a much bigger focus on getting rid of unallocated water, if you want to call it that, those kinds of things. I think the thing to remember is no matter how you look at this in terms of, okay, is there a corresponding reduction in water? As one of the aldermen sitting over there mentioned, I don't have great eyes, so I apologize, I can't read your placard, I can David, but I can't read the back end. Said, you can either depreciate your system and have your system deteriorate over time and not move forward with trying to keep it in a reasonable manner. What we've done in our master planning study is we've looked at this in a fashion of what we tried to come up with something that was reasonable. Now, I can tell you that in that, the amount of water main that you're looking at replacing, your renewal and replacement program, is less than industry standard. So at some point, it's gonna catch you, meaning if you don't start now and continue to do that. Why is it less than industry standard? Because your system, based on our experience, you don't need to be at that industry standard replacement level, but you do need to consider that you do need to renew and replace. So I understand all the discussion and all the comments and things on that, but at some point, if you don't take care of these kinds of things now, it's like not putting oil in your car. At some point, your engine's gonna burn out. You need to be able to maintain upgrades to your system, or you don't have a larger situation to deal with later.
Alderman Noriko.
I'd like to clarify an issue related to the rates. There's a senior citizen and low-income rate. Is that based on the senior citizen over age 65 real estate tax? What is it based on then?
Kathy?
Do you want to explain it, Brian?
The rebate program?
No, the senior water rate structure, not the utility rebate.
It's
But
labeled as
it's-
senior
it's
citizen,
seniors
low
low
income.
income, it's not just if you're a senior, that you're
Right.
receiving a lower water bill.
But it's based on the income of that,
Exactly.
correct, yeah. And I don't know what that income level is, but
Oh, okay.
senior citizens who have a certain level of income,
Mhm.
and I believe the rate is 80% discount on their water utility bill.
Right.
But Alderman Noriko, that has to be applied for separately from your property tax.
Okay,
Correct.
but there isn't any proposed change to that with this new, okay, okay. And do we
Oh.
have any idea what percentage of individuals qualify for that?
So it's an annual application process.
Okay.
Carrie Parker actually does the application processing. I don't want to put her on the spot, but about how many? Right now, we have about 250 applications. Okay.
Okay.
So about 250 applications we receive annually.
Okay, thank you.
There was another question, Alderman Baker. Did you have?
I was going to ask what the age is that you get to get the application in, but
65.
65, okay. My question is, I'm looking at these scenario 1, 2, and 3, and I'm seeing 8.5% on scenario 2. No way would I support that. That's too big of a jump. But I don't care about the 1.5 and 5 years from now by paying 4.5, say, on scenario 1. I'd like to see a scenario of 3 point, whatever it needs to be to reach your goal, so that we can just put it to bed and not have to revisit it so many times as we've done.
But I thought we were told 4% scenario 3 doesn't meet future
Well,
capital.
I said 3 point some number, not, I know 3% would not be enough, it adds up to
4%,
27.
Dave. Scenario 3 is 4%.
No, not if you look all the way down, sir.
Oh,
I said I
okay.
don't care about that 1.5 way down the road.
Oh.
We're getting hit with 4 up front, or some number like 3.3, or I don't have a calculator to be able to figure out your, future and present value of money and what you're trying to goal here.
We did look at scenarios similar to that, and the challenge becomes that your capital improvement plan is not uniform every year, and that it spikes and drops, so that the timing of the capital dollars needed to fund your program change over time. And in general, there's a declining nature to those costs. So the further out that we look, in the last 5 years of the study, more of the capital improvement plan is directed to the renewal and replacement main projects, and less of it to the specific facilities that Brian and his team have identified. So the ability to determine an average rate for the entire 10-year period would likely compromise some of the other policy goals we're trying to hit, which would be the $1 million of capital reserves and trying to maintain that without accumulating it too far.
So you're just worried about the upfront costs over the 5 years, so really, if the flavor of the council is to not hit that 8.5, then our two choices are either 4% or 4.5% for 5 or 6 years. Is that?
Brian?
Just one more thing maybe to consider. We keep on kind of talking about water rates, and maybe one thing for the council to consider is more this base set fee. Right now, it's $5 monthly fee that most residents pay. What's nice about that is it's a set dollar amount. It's not based on consumption, it's not based on reduced consumption like we've seen over the past 10 years. And so it's kind of a fixed income, so to speak, and there is a lot of justification for it. If we based it solely on water use, and a resident used 1 or 2 units of water a bill cycle, which amounts to $6, I can guarantee you that 3 months of use did not pay for what that resident actually got out of our water system, which means the water towers that we have to maintain, the water mains that we have to replace and repair. And so there is a fixed cost to our system regardless of water use. If our water use was cut in half, it doesn't mean our costs get cut in half. And so one thing I guess maybe for council to consider is not so much a water rate increase, but maybe that base fee increase that would match, because really what they're talking about isn't so much a 4.5% rate increase, they're talking about a 4.5% revenue increase. And so one way to, I guess, ensure that you have that revenue available is to base it more on a user fee as opposed to just a consumption fee. So just one thing to maybe throw out there. As Alderman Jacobson mentioned, when you raise your rates 1.5% or 1% each year based on the CPI, you lose 2.5%, and you do that for 10 years straight. You know, there's very little that you can do in terms of capital improvements and things. You are losing money every year, and so that'd be one way to counteract that potentially. If that's just an option.
So a meter rental fee, is that what you're
It used to be, at
proposing?
one time it was called a meter rental fee. We used to pay a $3 per month meter rental fee. That was switched back in 2003 or 2005 to a service fee, because really that's what it is. It's not so much to pay for the meter, although that's one of the components, but it's a base fee that really every resident, business should be paying to maintain our system for fire protection. It doesn't matter if you only use 1 gallon of water. There's a fixed cost that goes way beyond that 1 gallon of water that you used.
Can you come back with a proposal chart to raise that service fee, and we not, then we maybe don't even change the water fee incremental unit cost? And I know that the larger meters would have to have a larger number on them than the residential meters.
That is possible. Keep in mind, when you make adjustments to the fixed fee, that typically you're impacting the small user and the residential user more, because less of their bill is covered through volume charges and more of it is covered through the fixed component.
Which is why I added in that the larger meters should have and commercial should have a higher number than the
Alderman Mark.
residential.
If you look at the chart, the base fee or whatever is going up by 10% part in each month. So that part is going up higher. When you use in the usage, then that part is a lower increase, and the combined part comes in at the 4.5. So we are raising that, actually, the base fee by 10%, correct?
You are for the smaller meters. The larger meters are going up a little less than that, but
Going up
yeah.
like that. Okay. I had one other question, just
go ahead.
quick. This 4.5 then, that is just the flat 4.5, what we're about. There's no CPI in addition to that.
No.
And then in the following years, then we go back to the CPI, right?
Yes, when you see
Which
those
could be-
adjustments falling down to 1.5%, that's intended to represent CPI.
Okay, and the 1.5 could be, do we follow that strictly, or is that like a base. Like if CPI is only 1%, do we drop to 1% or do we have a,
It's based on the May to May CPI.
so it could go up to 2%, it could go down
Correct.
up and down. So that 1.5 is just kind of like an average placeholder type of thing.
Correct.
All right.
Chair Penel?
The 2 points that I was going to make have been made. Number one, I think it is an excellent idea to put more of this on the monthly fixed fee. And some people might argue that that's regressive. It's not, because what you're paying for is you're paying for the water system, and it is wrong to look at this from, I know this is probably the opposite of what I would argue in most cases. The user is the whole. The user is the office, okay? It doesn't matter who's in there, okay? There is a certain cost to having that home or building online. And the bottom line is that we've gotten to the point where the user fees that are usage-based are not paying for the fixed costs of the infrastructure. And so, therefore, we need to try to cover the fixed costs of the infrastructure. If we pumped no water, what would that cost us in terms of depreciation? And so I think that's important. And I would point out that other utilities do the same thing. You've got a fee. I use very little electricity, I use very little gas, but my gas bill and my electric bill are certainly not zero. So this is the way you price a utility, and I think we need to go that direction. Acknowledging Alderman Markwart's that there's already some increase in it.
Mike Verbeck?
For the work that needs to be done in the TIF district, are there any barriers to using TIF dollars for that work to help offset or alleviate these compounding increases to residents?
Could you restate the question? I'm not sure if I understand your question.
For the water system work that needs to be done in the TIF districts, are there any barriers to using those TIF dollars as opposed to compounding increases to residents to cover those over the years?
I'd want to double check with our economic development coordinator who's responsible for TIF before answering that question. But secondarily, and she will be at Wednesday night's meeting, so we can address it there. But at Wednesday's meeting, when we talk about the recommendation for TIF for fiscal year 16, what we are looking at, or staff's recommendation, is a process of looking at what are the projects that can help transform certain areas in the community, primarily the downtown. And you'll see when we get to the street presentation that the city has been utilizing TIF funds to support the street program. And with the TIF districts phasing out in the next couple years, we would not recommend continuing to utilize TIF for infrastructure, whether it be streets or or water, because there's other projects that can have more of an impact on the community. And it's really putting off the long-term issue of how are you going to fund streets in the future. The issue of water infrastructure we're already dealing with through the water fund. So we can address the question Wednesday night, but I think it's a philosophical and a policy issue for the council.
Alderman Jacobs?
I have two separate questions. One, obviously, we're looking in the budget, the difference between the fund balance and unrestricted fund balance. That $20 million, what is that restricted for? In our fund balance?
What page are you on? Oh,
129.
okay, sorry.
The difference between the unrestricted and restricted.
Fund balance in an enterprise fund incorporates all their fixed assets. That's why I'm trying to show just cash and cash equivalents.
So that's not cash?
No.
That's actual
That's includes
infrastructure
fixed,
and
yes,
what value we
exactly.
have in the infrastructure.
Exactly.
Okay. And the unrestricted is the actual cash balance, cash and cash equivalent balance?
typically that there could be some smaller items in there as well, but yes.
I did also want to mention, obviously, based on Dr. Peddle's comments, those other utilities that are charging those user fees, they are significantly higher than $15 in
Right,
most cases.
they are.
And I was relating to Bill, I mean, I have a property now where they bill me monthly for my water bill there, and it's $15 a month for their user fees. Obviously, in the talk to convert to every other month's billing, there will be an increase of almost 30% in those user fees right off the bat, correct? Rather than billing quarterly, we'll be billing every other month, so it'll be that extra third month.
It should offset. So, correct.
We factor it to what a month would cost.
We charge $10.
Mike, use the mic.
Again, I mean, that may be an opportunity, being now that we're billing twice, to start offsetting some of those costs if we look at going to a user fee based increase.
It could be. I mean, it wouldn't be the intention to, whatever the user flat fee is, to increase it when we switch to a 2-month cycle. So we'd break that quarterly amount down monthly and then,
It's the
yeah,
opportunity too.
it could.
Any further discussion on water? Okay, thank you. Kathy?
So if we move on to the airport fund,
Alderman Baker.
I just wanted to make sure that we're given an option of the service fee being opposite of what they said is currently built, and that the larger meters pay more than the homes instead of less.
Yes, we're going to ask Brian Faber to follow up with Burns and McDonald to be able to come up with that, I'm assuming scenario 4, to look at an increase to that flat rate.
That pays.
Thank you.
That's what I'm
That would be
hearing.
the tendency that I would want to go, is little or no increase in the user fee, and have the costs associated on that service fee, but certainly a larger meter like NIU has many of, we heard over 100, there should be an extra cost into those larger meters.
Yeah, my point in bringing up the user fee wasn't so much to change the scenarios, but to think of the scenarios more as, for instance, scenario 1 is a 4.5% increase that they're recommending. Maybe using the base fee as part of that 4.5% increase, as opposed to just looking at it as a rate increase to get to 4.5%. We do it in combination, maybe with an increase in base fee over and above the dollar that they're recommending. Maybe you go $2 there and you go, you know, if council is looking at, you know, scenario 1. So not necessarily trying to develop another scenario, but use a different way of getting to scenario 1, if that's the one that you're.
Well, just show us those options so that we can figure out what everybody's thinking.
So just, sorry. I-
Use the microphone.
That's what I'm gonna do. Can I use this mic right here? Is this
Sure.
on? So I just want to clarify to make sure that we understand. I think what you're looking for us to do is look at scenario 1 as the primary base case, but see what happens if we go to more of a, instead of a user fee, to basically a service fee to accomplish a similar fund balance of being able to have the $1 million fund balance and make the capital improvements that we're looking at in the master plan. Is that correct? To look at some scenarios where we've increased the service fee portion of that?
I was asking for scenario 1 and 3, but maybe you could poll the council right now if nobody's interested in
Oh,
3.
we can look at 3 too. I'm sorry, I only heard the scenario 1 comment, so we can.
Chair Peddle.
I want to point out that the issue of the service fee is one where it would be difficult to raise enough money to pay for the capital.
The whole
needs.
thing, yes.
You know, if you raise the service fee $5 a month, okay, so $60 a year, you're gonna only raise $600,000, which isn't gonna come close to what we need to raise. I mean, it's gonna have to, you're not gonna be able to do it without a water rate increase as well. Because, I mean, a $60 increase, $5 a month increase is gonna only generate $600,000. 550 actually, because there's only 10,974 service lines.
But I don't know the percentage of them that are larger than 3/4 inch. And
True.
the way they might weight that, so we have a couple choices, we may see something that pops out as an easier way to do it.
Well, yeah, right, but I mean, if you averaged $5 a month, which for a 3/4 inch line, that's a big increase in the user.
I'm not suggesting we do that, I hope we don't have to.
No, but I'm saying if you did that, you'd only raise $600,000.
So is the preference of council to look at further analysis of scenario 1 and 3?
Does anybody like to?
I'm seeing consensus. Look at 1 and 3.
Okay, we will look at 1 and 3 and evaluate kind of a combination of those things, because you are absolutely correct, just raising service fees by itself will not get us to where we need to be. Okay.
Connie Golden?
I just wanted you to reiterate the information briefly that you had on 3, because it sounded like 3 wasn't an option to be able to keep up with what we needed to do.
Three was not, 3 was a 4%, I believe.
Right.
Increase.
Right.
And at 4%, we were not able to continue to to maintain the minimum fund balance that we wanted of $1 million and do all of the capital programs as we've identified.
Thank you, Connie, and that's why we were focused on scenario 1. So I'd repoll the council. Alderman
But
Fanucci.
John, over the 9 years, scenario 3 actually increases the rate a little bit higher than scenario 1. Like scenario 1 over the 9 years, the increase in consumers is 32.27%. Scenario 3 is 32.31%. Over the 9 years.
You gotta compound.
You got to
Yeah, you're-
compound. And again, I think when Dave was up there, he said at the end of the day, when you look at all 3 of these scenarios, they were very similar in terms of what they do at the end of the day. So it's a timing issue in terms of.
I understand that is a timing issue, that the scenario 1 has a greater increase early on than it does at the end.
Well, and it does so that you can fund, the intent of that was to fund some of the things, not the water main portion, the renewal and replacement of the water main was consistent throughout, relatively consistent throughout the program. But there were other things like the painting, the resin replacement at the water treatment facilities that need to be up a little earlier. The resin replacement needs to be up a little earlier at a minimum in the program so that you can continue to operate and provide quality water to your system. So we can't, if we could, in theory, take and just make the same amount every year in the
And I
capital, that'd be
understand
easy,
that. I
but we've
understand.
got to try and
But, you
balance
know,
it.
For the consumer, though, over those 9 years, that scenario 3 actually turns out to be more expensive in terms of where the water rate is at the end of those 9 years. That was a point I was trying to make.
Yes, and I agree.
So maybe we're back to looking at scenario 1 and 3.
No, or just one.
I think that what I would say, and again, I think what 1 and 3 are is they're kind of a permutation of a very similar base scenario. So I think we can accomplish the same thing that everybody's looking for by looking at scenario 1.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I'm seeing consensus here, so scenario 1.
Okay, we will do that, and what we'll do is, Brian, later today, if you want to call me on my cell phone, or first thing Monday, we'll talk about timing and getting that taken care of.
Kathy?
First, one correction in the senior low-income utility tax rate age is actually 62. So I think I said 65. On to airport.
I still don't get there.
Thank you.
The airport fund is considered an enterprise fund, and we have Tom Cleveland here, so he's available to field any questions. You'll notice this year we are not just automatically transferring anything out of the general fund to support the airport fund, and are trying to make it self-sufficient. So 2016 revenues, they're budgeted at $2.122 million, which is about 34% lower than the amended budget. Of this, almost $1.2 million can be attributed to $0 being transferred from the general fund. The large transfer last year was due to a balloon payment on the final 2005 GO bond issuance, and I believe that was over $700,000. FY16 expenditures are at about $2.3 million. This is also lower than FY15. Again, the 2005 bond issuance has been paid off. There is still one small debt issuance in the airport fund. It was the 2004 GO bond series, which we refunded in 2014. A portion of that is part of airport. But this particular expense this year was $630,000. It's dropped to $75,650 in 16. So again, I go back to cash equivalents. In fund balance in the airport fund, there are capital assets and fixed assets. But cash and cash equivalents is going to drop down to about $145, which is well below the city's fund balance policy, and we realize that. Staff is going to be reviewing all fees currently being charged at the airport over the course of the next 6 months. I think we want to try to establish this as a self-supporting fund, and so that's the direction we want to head.
Just a comment on that, if we could. If we look at last year's cash flow, excluding all capital, are they operating their budget at a net zero?
If I look back about 3 years, it's gone back and forth. Net income and, they've had an income gain and a deficit for cash flow purposes. Pretty small, like $110,000 or $200-some thousand either way. So they're trying, they really try to break zero.
Understand. But I guess my point is, in 16, if just doing, and I know you and I are going to meet and talk about some one-off items, but that $200,000 that's not included in the transfer, I look at their operating numbers net of capital. If you just take the capital out and the project spending on just the net operating basis, it appears they're still losing about $200,000 in the 16.
Yeah, they are still operating in a deficit.
Okay, so, and I just mentioned that, are we really getting, when we look at our general fund and looking at these one-off entries, are we really getting to a zero-based budget, or are we working in a true deficit on the operating position? So this is just one of those items to consider for the council when they think about that regarding operations.
And the airport did end up with a decent fund balance at the end of 15, which is why we were able to pass, go into a deficit.
It's a one-time item.
Yep,
right?
yep.
Yeah.
So the budget assumptions for the airport salaries, non-bargaining unit employees, again, this is just the increment difference that affected the airport fund, is about $39,000. Some of the new requests that are that are incorporated into the fiscal 16 budget include a 12,000-gallon diesel fuel tank cleaning and testing, infrared heater replacement, $7,600, security gate operator for $7,500, and seal coat airport maintenance parking lot for $4,000. And Tom can probably speak to this better than I can, but the airport, they do a lot of large airport projects as well, based on grant funding that they can supply and secure throughout the year. So these just happen to be the new requests above and beyond that have not been asked for in the past. So, any questions?
We're showing.
Go ahead.
We're showing the negative fund balance end of year. I mean, are we leaving it intentionally negative in hopes that we come in over revenues and that does zero? I know as of a year or two ago, it was our goal not to leave negative fund balances and to pay those through the transfers so they weren't accruing on the books.
We're not showing a negative fund balance. We're almost at break even zero, but we are passing a deficit budget. So there's a negative revenues are less than expenditures this in fiscal 16. Fund balance again in the airport fund. I'm not if you're looking at it.
Here, unrestricted fund balance negative 63,000.
Yeah, again that. And that's not the case, and I apologize for that report. I honestly don't think it's correct, because the fund balance in the airport should incorporate all the assets, so it should be much larger than that, quite honestly. But we're
Unrestricted, obviously, it's the cash balance.
yeah, right. And again, I believe it's an incorrect calculation in the report, so. But I will double check it for you. No, we should not be passing a budget with, exactly. Nor, right. If, because we're trying to pass it, it's gonna be so close to zero, we can do an interfund loan at the end of the year. But I don't think we would just want to make the assumption that it's gonna come in negative and try to incorporate it as,
But Kathy, help me understand what's going to correct that report. Dave is indicating the balance is at 63,000 negative.
there's a couple of the fund balance calculations in that crystal report that's in the book that just did not calculate correctly. So that entire report is being redone and recalculated. I've calculated and manually calculated all the fund balances, and it's on a sheet kind of in the front of your budget book, so. And you'll get a new report on June 8th, yes, so.
And I would just add, when we went through the airport fund in detail, 2 of the particular revenue sources we're going to be looking at in the next 6 months. Number 1, hangar rentals. Those contracts, those agreements are coming up, so there's a potential for additional revenue there. And number 2, landing fees. So these are, and there may be other things that we're looking at, but those are the 2 that come to the top of my mind, so that it would be able to have an impact on the overall budget.
So I think we're going to go into capital. We're going to skip streets. John Liskowski will be here Wednesday to do a street presentation. So we'll discuss capital projects.
If I could just add, Director Haley, the document that was set out at your place today, we talked, page 1 is water, page 2, which gives an overall summary of City Engineer Liskowski's memo that was in the packet, and really provides five different options. If you want to look at option 5 is the current practice. Option 1 is just showing how much it would cost to maintain the streets. We're not recommending option 1, but that just gives you a little background if you haven't looked through the information. We debated whether to go through the presentation today, but with his absence, his flight was canceled. He planned on being here, and the fact that the water fund went as long as it did, we'd rather delay that presentation and have him do it so he can answer your questions in depth, and then just go on to the next items. But please take a look at that.
So Capital Projects Fund, this fund, it's Fund 50. It should account for the capital costs associated with buildings, street improvements, stormwater improvements, bikeway paths, and park improvements. We are in the process of establishing a true 5-year capital plan. I believe that was one of your handouts in the agenda packet. It's a work in progress, but I think it tells a good story, So budgeted revenues in this fund for fiscal 16 are $355,000. This is the only dedicated source of revenue currently being hitting this fund. It is the 2 cents of the local motor fuel tax that the city imposes on local gas stations. Keep in mind the local motor fuel tax total rate is 3.5 cents. 1.5 cents of that goes to pay off the debt to the public safety building, which will go away once that debt is gone.
Can I jump in?
Alderman Baker.
If there's one fee that the council should consider, it's the tax on the gasoline, especially since the price has dropped dramatically. We don't have that sales tax coming in off the increased prices that we were observing a year or 2 ago. And back when Mayor Polson was in, it was a split vote. It just barely didn't go the 5 cents. I mean, it almost went to 5 cents, and there were regrets later. We should have done it and just be done with it. So that's the only place that I know of that we're kind of an island here, and the gas stations can charge whatever they want, and you're not going to drive 20, 30 miles to go fill up your tank unless you happen to be going that way anyway. And it's not a debate for now, but just keep in mind that if it were to come back, I wouldn't be surprised if that is the one place we could get a little extra revenue if we needed it.
The capital projects included in here are basically kind of status quo of what's been done in the past. Miscellaneous repairs to the 3 fire stations are incorporated in here. One addition, blue box and installation of alarms. This is alarms for the city hall. So if at the front counter they have a button they can push, it goes directly to the police station. So we're going to try to incorporate that. Garage door, track, and an opener, non-TIF sidewalks, stormwater system improvements. Again, these last 4 have been incorporated into this fund annually, really. Alley improvements, and then local road overlay. These are the non-TIF streets. So this is a horrible slide, but it does kind of tell you, just based on status quo with just $355,000 hitting here, and even just the status quo projects, and this should have been incorporated in your agenda. By the time fiscal 20 comes around, we're at a negative 5.7 million if we don't try to incorporate an additional revenue stream to assist with our capital projects. And this doesn't include John's Streets, which is a complete separate presentation. So on to equipment and fleet, capital equipment replacement fund. This fund should provide for long-term financial planning for routine placement of major capital equipment. The replacement of equipment is typically funded by transfers from operating funds as well as some dedicated revenue sources. Currently, we have 2 funds. I will be combining these into one throughout fiscal 16. They're Fund 52 and 53. So the budget for this, budgeted revenues are $476,000 between these 2 funds. This includes the rental income the city receives from water tower leases. And then we get some reimbursements through IDOT and the school district that hit. Transfers from the general fund have also been a source of revenue annually to these, to both of these. And those are the only revenue sources we have, so. These are some of the requests that are within the budget. And any questions on any of these items, we have our departments here that would be happy to speak to them. A Tahoe, this is a fire department vehicle. 2 Chevy Tahoes, those are police department vehicles.
And those, Kathy, are beyond the 2 that are funded?
Yep, these are above and beyond the other 2 that are in the general fund.
Okay.
Remaining payment for the ladder truck. So there's a portion of the dollars that are in fiscal 15 that will transfer over to 16, and then this will be the remaining dollars to cover the purchase of the ladder truck. We should be receiving that truck in September, hopefully. We do have 1 lease payment still running through here for a fire truck loan. Human resource software for recruitment purposes has been incorporated. Server refresh daily cycle, this is just upgrading our current IT server. Data storage for the police department, this is increasing the storage for the police department server. Financial software, this is the $170,000, this is where the other dollar amount is coming out of for the financial software we talked about earlier. OSSI Freedom application, that's police department software, and then Life Pack 12s for the fire department are the items currently running through this fund.
Kathy, can I make one comment before we move to the next slide? For everybody in the room, I just want everybody to know this is the 2nd year that street operations has been 0 funded for our equipment. That is going to be very impactful on our snow removal in the next couple of years. So I just want everybody to know that this is the 2nd year.
And I think I have some good pictures of your equipment. So we'll show them.
Kathy, for any of the vehicles or hard equipment that's gonna be replaced, could we see a list of what is actually being replaced? In other words, like the 2 Tahoes, what are they replacing, so that we have an idea of the age and mileage, et cetera, and what's being replaced? And we can, if you would just share that with us Wednesday, that'd be fine.
Yes. I have a complete list as I go through here. You'll see we've created an actual true capital equipment replacement listing
Okay.
showing if we were to have been funding these, all of our fleet and all of our equipment as we should have been based on price, initial price, useful life, depreciation, replacement value, annually, this is what we should have been funding. And it lists every vehicle.
Right.
So unless the chief knows what 2 vehicles those are replacing.
Well, you know, it's always a question because we have 7 vehicles in one category that have over 130,000 miles on them. We have 5 vehicles in another category that have over 100,000, and of that 5, 3 of them have over 140,000 miles on
Yeah.
them.
Well, again, though, it's not just mileage, there's other things that come
Yeah.
into play. And it's just that I want to make sure that we're, you know, with my background, make sure that we're making those most efficient choices that we can, so.
And I agree with that, and the only thing I would say to that, Alderman, is that some of the vehicles that we end up replacing are in such bad shape, like we have 2 of them that are on our roster now that are sitting at fleet that are totally inoperable.
Yeah.
Transmission's out, and they don't
Well,
run,
and
period.
again, I understand that with my background, that's why, but I, just so we're aware of those things and not just, this is what we want to get, not, but I want to know what we're getting rid of, so it's
Sure.
more justified. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, again, the horrible slide book tells a great story. This is truly, if you look at FY15 is the estimate, FY16 is what's currently in the budget, and then based on those funding sheets that I spoke of, if we were to keep up with the replacement that should be necessary for our fleet and equipment, because we have deferred so much, if you look at fiscal 17 for fleet, we would need to put $4.5 million in there just to catch up to where we should be at. And then between, well, over 5 million, over 6 million, over $8 million to be funding our fleet. And then equipment is the next slide. And again, I think it tells a story. This is a listing of equipment and fleet that we have currently in our Hansen system. We have shown the replacement value, we've shown the useful life, we've shown when it should be replaced to come up with these schedules to create the dollar amount. I'm going to try to give you a picture of how much is out there that we haven't replaced that should be replaced. The listing of requests this year for fiscal 16, I can't remember, but it was probably over 25 requests that we had for vehicles and equipment, and we approved 3, I believe. So this is also, I'm sorry, these are very near and dear to me slides, but they're horrible to look at. So I just wanted to show you that we are in fact trying to create a true funding process where the dollar amount that we're tying to of what we should be either dedicating a revenue source to these funds or transferring money from the general fund to help replace this equipment and fleet in a timely manner. Again, the dollars show in fiscal 17, 6.5 million are due to the city just putting off replacement of these vehicles and equipments over the last several years. Our current fund balance policy for these state that the funds should maintain unrestricted net assets of planned replacement for the current fiscal year only. I think that in the future, we should really change that fund balance policy to more of a best practice policy. And I'll speak to that best practice policy in a little. So this is a good snapshot. These are the number of city vehicles by model year. So you can see we still do have some vehicles from the 1970s. And so on, so it's a good slide.
That's ours.
Are those the undercover vehicles that just go around and do drug buys?
And then we have just total vehicles by department. So you can see the big 3 departments, police, public works, and fire. And to to just follow back up what Mark was saying, Public Works really do have quite a bit of vehicles, and you'll see in equipment, a lot of equipment as well that needs some replacing, so. This is equipment by model year. And then equipment by department. And I just was inundated by each department on pictures, and I thought picture speaks, volumes. We have some very old, poor equipment. It's in poor shape, and it's not just, I don't think it's just something that we would, we want new vehicles. I think that it starts to get and hinder possibly the health and safety of our residents in some cases. So I have department heads that are here. If anyone wants to speak to any of the vehicles, by all means.
Currently, as far as the fire department, we have 9 utility vehicles, which I call them, and these are a couple of them. And 8 of those vehicles are 10 years or older. So one is 17 years old. So some of these vehicles are used not on a daily basis, but there are also vehicles that are used, like the vehicle in the upper right-hand corner with the rust-rot bed that pulls a 10,000-pound hazmat trailer. So that's just kind of the example of the vehicles we have on the road.
There's a couple more.
That's a picture of the 2001 fire engine on the bottom, or on the left-hand side. And the rust is getting so bad, if you pushed on some of the lights, you can see around that light, the light would fall inside the body. And we've had to actually replace some of those and bolt steel on the outside to put the lights back in.
Anne Marie, help me understand when we'll be coming back to fleet replacement policy. We've got a 5-year presentation here that shows, we haven't been doing justice. I think Mark's comment of Public Works speaks to the fact we're not doing justice to proactive replacement policy.
Mm-hmm.
How do we envision coming back to that?
Sure. The best way to address it is after Director Haley goes through the presentation, talking about the current condition of the vehicles and capital. She does have a presentation on alternate revenue options. Ultimately, what's in the budget is what we've gone through. The departments, I think, as she outlined, had come in with a number of requests. The items that have been recommended to the budget are the most critical to be done this fiscal year. So you will see the vehicles that we talked about that are in the fiscal year 16 budget. Ultimately, if we could afford more, you would see more in there. So for fiscal year 16, we would move forward with what we have in here. And then if the council and the Finance Advisory Committee want to look at alternate revenue options, you can. What you're seeing here, and I might be going into what Director Haley's going to talk about, is what I understand from the staff that's been here is for the past 16 years, the city has not had a reserve fund or has not been fully adequately paying for and replacing for vehicles. And as a result of that, it's hitting us now. On top of that, approximately 10 or 11 years ago, the city went out and borrowed to purchase new and used vehicles and equipment. And that 10-year period is coming due. And further, we've found is that there was no plan of how to replace those vehicles when that 10-year period was done. So we essentially have a double whammy of 16 years of not keeping pace with the vehicles and then having this bulk of vehicles that were purchased at once coming due. And there's some critical equipment that's necessary that was paid for in the fire department and other departments that we absolutely have to look at. So vehicles is one major issue that need to be addressed. But for fiscal year 16, we do have minimal amounts recommended in there.
Thank you. Chair Pelley.
I have a quick question for Chief Hicks. Chief, when I think I understand police better than fire with respect to vehicles, but when we saw the pictures of the vehicles, you know, there's no question that we see the rust, et cetera. But if the average citizen were to look, with the exception of that Dodge Durango, you see, for example, that 1998 Chevy, okay, it's got 28,000 miles on it. Can you talk about mileage on a fire vehicle and why it's a better option with the low mileage? Does that count for anything? Would we be better off fixing the rust if the vehicle is operational? I don't understand this stuff, so.
Actually, the vehicle, like I say, it's 20 years old, so, and it's sat outside most of its life.
Okay.
So that's the downside to that. We're obviously gonna refix this vehicle. There is no money to replace the vehicle. The biggest issue is when you don't keep up, and we have, I'm gonna throw out the ambulances, for example. We currently have 6 ambulances in the city. 4 of those ambulances are over almost 10 years old or older, and 2 of them are 12 years old. You get to the point of reliability and safety. Brake lines rusting through, things like that. That's not something you want people riding in the back of in the ambulance. And you can only do so much maintenance on them before they're not a true safe vehicle.
Okay, so that I understand. I mean, and I think that we need to understand the ones that are safety and the ones that, you know, if for example, the one truck was a matter of rusting around the light, well, that's different from a safety perspective than rusting the brake lines. But
You know,
I understand the need to replace.
You get frame rail rust. I mean, they start to get worn out.
Yeah.
You know, the vehicle with 20-some thousand miles on it, for example, that vehicle only pulls trailers. You know, it's not used on a daily basis out in the street.
I'm sorry, Alderman Baker.
I'll try to be really quick on the equipment and the new vehicles. Early on when I became elected, we needed 10 vehicles. We had $70,000. The bank rates were like 6-7%. But we could lease 10 vehicles and stay within our budget of that 70,000. So we did so. A few years later, it sounds like we did a bond to make payments. My concern is that the councils change every 2 years, and if you set up a fund to try to put money away for replacing vehicles, it's going to get robbed and spent somewhere else. And it's really easy just to go down to any of the local banks, and I'm sure you can get under 2%. I can, just as an individual, on a new vehicle, and just make the payments. And presto, we have it all taken care of. We did it twice since I've been here, and it looks like it's time to do it again.
So I think that
Kathy, can I speak to, before we get past those pictures?
Yes.
There's some
Yes.
really detailed information that needs to come to light. This is P23. This is one of our main route snowplows in Section 2. This truck's new price was a little over $80,000. To date, I've spent over $60,000 on this vehicle and repairs. Last winter alone, it went down 9 times in the middle of snow removal. We're using backup vehicles. The thing's bed has got enough holes in it, and we've talked about patching. We've welded new beds in these things. They rot back out. It's a corrosive environment. This truck is unreliable, and it needs to go. The next frame, that's the cab corner where the driver sits. The diesel emissions come through the floor to the point where you've got to wipe the dash down. It's absolutely pathetic to have to put one of our staff members in this vehicle. It's dangerous. This is our patch trailer. With the lack of street maintenance we're doing right now, our potholes are deplorable. This vehicle, we've replaced the burner, we've done welding and everything. The main time that we need this vehicle is in the wintertime when potholes are most prevalent. This machine's flame goes out when it's lower than 20 degrees right now. So when we need the potholes the most, we can't even patch right now. The vehicle won't run. So we're finding ourselves, we go out, we run it till the flame goes out, then we bring it back in the barn, and we have to warm it up so we can start the vehicle up just to shovel pothole mix. We can run more salt out the side of our dump trucks than we do through our salt spreaders because of the holes. I mean, I could go on. This chart right here, of the vehicles that we have on here, almost 80% of our vehicles have surpassed their life expectancy. I mean, we're gonna go more into depth in that stuff, but I just wanted to get that out there.
So I don't think the intention is to to complain. It's that I think we want to shoot for best practices. Certainly a lease can be done in and when we may need to have to do a lease, but I think best practices, according to the Government Finance Officers Association, and it's a best practice for a reason, they recommend that local, state, and provincial governments establish a system for assessing their assets and then appropriately plan and budget for any capital maintenance and replacement needs. I think certainly creating a new revenue source dedicated to long-term fiscal stability of the city is sound financial practice. The current fund balance policy for all capital funds state that these funds should maintain unrestricted net assets of planned replacement for current fiscal year only, which goes against best practice. And this policy has not helped maintain our fleet and equipment at the level necessary to ensure the city is providing the level of service our residents expect and deserve. By deferring essential maintenance or asset replacement of the city could reduce the organization's ability to provide services and could threaten public health, safety, and overall quality of life.
I was trying to say that since interest rates are so low, leasing would not be the logical move. But why can't we just borrow the money like any business would and then make those payments
I
and
think
replace what we
certainly
need?
we could. I think we just want to kind of create this plan for the future. I think we want to start to plan for replacement of our vehicles. I think we should keep track of our vehicles and just because we're saying it's 10 years and we need to replace that 10 years. No, absolutely, we assess it again in 10 years. But if it becomes hazardous or dangerous to either our staff or to the residents, then hopefully we've set enough funding aside to be able to replace it at that time. Because leasing may not be as great of an option at some point. So.
I'm against leasing right now.
Okay,
We can go down to
good.
the local
Me too.
bank, it's 7-year financing, 2%. I'm sure I could make the calls and come back by Wednesday with that plan. There's several banks that would be happy to put their name on that type of deal.
And I think we have been very creative. Fire Chief Hicks flying down to Florida and getting a great deal on a used vehicle. I mean, that's also good. We don't need the best of the best or the newest and the shiniest, but so we have used our limited resources very well. So with general fund revenue streams flat and the diminishing revenue dollars the general fund has received from the TIF funds, or will be, the ability for the general fund to even fund a portion of the capital assets is severely diminished. Looking at alternate revenue sources to dedicate to this objective of building a true capital equipment replacement program and funding a true 5-year capital improvement plan is important to the future of the city of DeKalb. And with that, we go into alternate revenue discussions. I do not have a slide presentation on it, but I did write a memo, and I'd be happy to go through those.
Kathy, I am looking at the hour we're approaching, and I anticipate these alternate revenue source discussions are going to be more time than possibly we have to allocate this morning. Therefore, I'm going to suggest that we defer discussion on the alternate revenue sources until Wednesday.
Okay.
And we can put that on the front of Wednesday's agenda. Unless there is comment that anyone feels they want to urgently make this afternoon. Okay.
There is a memo on some alternate revenue sources. If you want to read it, please call me with any questions, concerns. If you have another thought that you'd like to discuss, I can do some research on it prior to Wednesday. Also, if there's any questions on the budget overall, we're going to try to do a wrap-up on Wednesday night. We'll bring up some major bullet points of topics that we've left hanging where decisions need to be made. But I am in the office all week, so please email me, call me, and let me know if there's any specific questions. So I'd be happy to come prepared Wednesday to kind of make the night a little quicker.
Are there any other items to be added today? Okay. I'm at the point of public participation. Is there anyone in the gallery wishing to comment? And I'd ask you to come to the podium, please, for the microphone.
I'll take you up on that.
State your name, please.
My name is Ron Naylor.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity here. Just a couple quick comments. So, I have long been interested in the water study report, primarily on it. I'm pleased to see that that has come and been delivered today. I think we started trying to get that about 3-4 years or so ago. We finally made it, and I think it truly addressed some of at least my concerns, as well as I think the council's concerns that are out there. And I have to compliment the staff, Brian, and the consultants. I thought personally that was a pretty decent report, one of the better water study reports that I've seen, at least in my career, and been involved in myself over the years. Thought it was very thorough. And my own position on that, I guess, would be, is I would support, if I was on the council still, the number one recommendation by the consultant, by the staff, the 4.5%. And particularly if you remember back, it's been done many times in the past, and most recently, about 5-6 years ago, we had a series of 10% increases. I think it was for 3 years in a row or so, to get ourselves back up out of sort of debt 5-6 years ago, at least when I first came on the council there. So really, I appreciate the discussion and all that, but you're really splitting hairs when you're talking about whether it's 4 or 4.5% or whatever it is. But my own personal thought on that would be to go with that recommendation of number one of the 4.5%, because it's very minute, and as he also reminded everyone there was already of that probably 1 to 1.5% of that would be the CPI amount anyway, so you're really only changing it by 2.5%, which is a few dollars, very few dollars. And further, the water bill, the water portion of that bill that you get from the city is basically only about 1/3 of that bill. You're paying just about as much if you look at the sanitary district's cost to dump it down the drain as to what you are paying for to get it out of the spigot there. And the other third basically is your waste management bill. And that, I believe the agreement contract calls for a 3% increase on an annual basis for the next, whatever that is, 5-6 years, that agreement is good for on it. With regards to the airport, also some of the comments there, before I go there, on the water discussion, the payment in lieu of taxes, that issue that was talked about here and explained, I too somewhat would have a problem with that, or I have a problem with that transfer, but raised a question, and maybe this is something that the council might want to research, as to, in the classes of water consumers out there, whether or not that would be applicable to applying to our governmental properties throughout the city that doesn't pay taxes as well. And I don't know, through our home rule authority and all that, whether or not that could be explored to apply that, create a separate class of users, and you put all those non-taxing bodies within that separate class, and then you adjust that base rate to $15, to $5, whatever it is, to try and offset some of that taxes. Of course, that would raise it up considerably, but that might be an approach to collecting additional revenues from those properties that don't pay any real estate taxes here in the city of DeKalb. Just a thought. I don't know if that's feasible or not. Another area of comment is on the airport and the airport funding and that budget. And there's always this discussion about the fund balance and paying for itself, et cetera. And I realize that's definitely a goal, and it's a goal probably of every general aviation airport out there in the country. But there's very few, if any, general aviation airports of our size and smaller that is self-sufficient. There's always got to be some supplement in there if you're going to truly have a respectable airport. And DeKalb probably has one of the greatest GA airports probably in the state of Illinois here. But also to remember that is that in that budget that's like $2.5 million or maybe pushing $3 million, and I've sort of argued this in the past, is the way we budget for that causes a lot of the problems, I think, and concerns out there, is that, you know, if you look on the revenue side, the majority of the revenue is state and federal grants. And even though that's included in the budget, none of that money, whether it's state money or federal money, ever comes through the coffers of the city of DeKalb. We never see that money. They pay the bills out of that funds, out of the state coffers, out of the federal coffers on it. And I've always argued I didn't understand why that was included as part of our budget. I could understand it being accounted for, but to be over in a separate fund to where in our truly budget, what the city of DeKalb budgets for, is truly the operations and the maintenance and and only that portion of our share of those big capital improvements that would more truly reflect, I think, what the city's costs are, and would be a better way to account for our costs and to truly show what the revenues and the expenditures are citywide, or what the city is responsible for on it. But anyway, those are just some comments out there. I appreciate the opportunity. And I know you have a tough road to hoe here in the future, and particularly on the equipment and the capital improvements, the streets and all that. And good luck to everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderman O'Leary.
I was wondering, can we schedule another day of meetings outside of the 20th? Because we have not gotten through half of this now, and I want to be able to make a good decision. So I want to know, can we schedule another day, maybe the Thursday, the 21st, or the 27th? Because for us to try to cram all this in next Wednesday, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. So
We
can
could
we schedule another day?
I would second that to the 21st, but only if we need it, just to advertise it.
I think we're going to need it.
I'm hoping we don't.
Okay. Alderman Baker, you're suggesting 21st?
That's what Alderman Leary's first suggestion was, that I would
21st
concur
or the
with.
27th, yeah.
Otherwise, I don't mind staying home Memorial Day weekend. I'll be here Saturday, 8 a.m., bright and cheery.
What are, so the 27th?
27th.
How does that look for others?
That's a Wednesday.
That would be a Wednesday?
27th is a Wednesday?
Yeah, because we have our regular meeting on the 26th, that Tuesday, because Monday is the holiday. Yeah.
I'm seeing no one objecting to the
Well,
27th?
I'll go the 21st, not the 27th, if you're doing a poll.
Okay.
Mayor, the one issue we need to look at is the publication of the public hearing. We're taking this, the schedule we originally outlined to the council was to bring this to the June 8th. I'm looking at the calendar right now.
We could still land on that, though.
I know, but I need, so there's two issues. Number one, as far as the date for publicizing for the public hearing, and then number two, the staff time to turn around whatever revisions that you have to get it to June 8th.
Okay, but if we meet the 27th, you could still publicize the public hearing on the 22nd.
Yes, the only concern is that we'll have to double check. I'm going to look at Director DeVita. I see listed on my schedules, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting that night. Do you know if they're meeting that night or if we can move them to a different location?
For which date?
May
27th?
27th.
Yeah, we have a hearing on Jim Mason's polio.
So could we move them, maybe we could check with the police department to see if we can move them to an alternate location for that night. So that's the only I just want to put out there, but, so the 27th, okay.
And that,
Put an extra
what time
pressure
were
on
we
staff.
at? I don't have the times in
I
my
think we've been
schedule.
doing 5 o'clock.
5
for the
o'clock.
others.
5 o'clock on the 27th?
What's wrong with the 21st? It puts less pressure on the staff to turn around from one.
I'm gone.
So we're hitting 2 conflicts versus 1.
Okay, why don't we just stay an extra hour now?
Pardon?
Why don't we just stay an extra hour now?
Well, I'm not sure the hour is going to do that. And I think people may have plans. We have published 12.
We may finish Wednesday anyway, so.
That's true. Tom?
Thank you. I guess if you could, the question I have is on the agenda for Wednesday night. It sounds like we, again, have substantial amount of detail. You got the whole streets program, right? Which is in itself twice or 3 times more dollars involved
That's right.
than the water thing, which is fairly nominal, actually, in retrospect, compared to the other decisions. Plus, you've got a holdover on here that we didn't cover, so. It seems Wednesday's gonna be very busy, isn't it? 5 till 8, is
I
that what
didn't
we're planning?
realize the streets coming in.
5 till 9?
Oh, it is, okay. That's
5
good.
to 9?
That's what I was gonna ask.
What else is on the agenda?
Pardon?
TIF? Is that TIF?
TIF, we'd go through MFT, and then there's some small funds, SSAs, debts, just to go through them, all the other funds, but.
And then Mr. Verbeck's comments about an overall review or, sort of a comprehensive positioning discussion, all the taxes, all the revenues, all the recommendations that the finance advisory needs to come up with for each of the components.
I have a suggestion.
It seems like it's gonna be another.
If on the night of the 20th, we see that we might want to have to go to the 27th, you only need 48 hours, don't you? I mean, wouldn't that be the time to make that decision then? Okay, let's just try to get it done by the night of the 20th. And then the other question, that, so I don't bring it up next week, you know, I'm surprised that Alderman Naylor, well, retired Alderman Naylor, didn't carry the stick, and I'm hoping he doesn't pass that baton to me, because it's just like a broken record. The deferred maintenance on our streets, we didn't seem to bid anything this year. And the best deals are when you bid them in to be done in the spring. And if we start bidding stuff in the summer for fall, we're going to get huge upcharges. Are we planning on no maintenance this year? We're going to put it all off to next spring? Because money-wise, that would be the smarter move, if we get a new patching machine, of course. I'm really perplexed at what's happened. I mean, maybe it's because TJ had left and we just kind of got caught with our pants down here, but I'm not hearing about it, and I don't remember seeing any major street reconstruction projects that went out to bid this spring to be happening by June, July, August.
I'll ask City Engineer Liskowski when he's here on Wednesday when he starts his presentation, to give an overview as to what's planned for this fiscal year 16 and looking ahead.
Because, I mean, if they're not out and those contracts aren't let and they're not bid, I mean, I know the way it works. I've watched this for years. It might cost us 10, 20, 30, 40%, 50% more. I mean, you just can't send that stuff out in the summer and expect to get a reasonable price.
Mhm. This is one of the reasons as well. At the last meeting, we discussed justification for switching the fiscal year, and I know this is going to go to the Finance Advisory Committee to look at, but by switching the fiscal year to January 1, it will help us on the capital planning side to be able to bid earlier.
I pushed for that so many times. In fact, previous staff promised to do it, and for years they said, oh yeah, next year. Oh yeah, next year. That would do it.
Thank you.
Maybe now we have to.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? We're tentatively planning, and we'll confirm on Wednesday the 20th whether we need the 27th.
Yep, we'll plan on it.
Okay. Next meeting then is Wednesday, May 20th at 5 p.m. Anything further?
Yeah.
Director Haley?
The agenda for Wednesday should go out Monday, early.
Okay. Very good. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none. Tom?
Kudos to the water department.
Yeah. And again, compliments to staff for the preparation, and to all of FAC members and council that have attended today. I have a motion on the floor to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by O'Leary. Moved by Jacobson. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Carried. Thank you.
Mark,